All right, I'm gonna let everybody in so we can get settled before we start. Oops, nobody.
There isn't a way to have like all the like I can't bring all the commissioners to my front page of like the app on the iPad makes it so that I can only see 9 videos at one time.
Yes.
Is there a way to move those up? Does anybody have any hacks for me?
Yeah, no, not that I've found. What I do is let the you and the commissioners in first, and you seem to stay in the forefront, but as people change and talk, Zoom automatically moves people around. So you can pin individuals, but you can't pin select people. Unfortunately, I've really tried to figure that out because I would love to do that too.
Zoom has some work to do. I think virtual backgrounds are fine, but I also want virtual hairdos.
That's probably $1 million idea, so.
I'm too fidgety.
You heard it here first.
I'd go for virtual hair, okay?
You're in your time. I don't see video of Courtney. I see sound, and I don't see video of Lisa. I see sound.
They may have.
There I am. I'm here.
I'm here. Okay. We're about ready.
Friendly reminder, say your names and titles before you speak.
Thank you.
Craig is cricket again.
That better?
Okay, are we? I think so. Yep, there you go. Hey, look. All right, are we ready to get started?
5:45.
Yes.
Is Kurt ready?
Yes. Kurt, you going?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. All right. So before we begin the meeting, I will have Porter give us a rundown on the technical aspects of the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. My name is Porter Arneal, and as Mayor Ananda said, I'll be facilitating the Zoom video portion of tonight's meeting. With me here is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. She'll work alongside Mayor Ananda to facilitate the meeting proceedings. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and public access channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone else to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, I may mute or unmute people as needed just to keep the meeting going smoothly. Each time you speak, please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening remotely. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking on the video icon. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on during the meeting. If you're participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, somewhere on your screen you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all the meeting participants together. And now I'll turn the meeting back over to Mayor Ananda.
Thank you, Porter. This is Mayor Nanda. We will go ahead and do roll call at this time. Commissioner Bully?
Here.
Commissioner Shipley? Here. Vice Mayor Finkeldijk?
Here.
Commissioner Larson?
Here.
And this is Mayor Nanda, so we are all present and accounted for. Prior to jumping into our first agenda item, I will ask Sherry Riedemann to give us a little bit more information about this meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk, and I'm just going to go over some of the guidelines for holding the meeting virtually and ensuring that we're meeting the provisions of the Kansas Open Meetings Act. Commissioners, please remember to state your name and title each time you speak. All motions need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, the mayor will call on commissioners individually to provide their vote. Mayor, you will then need to announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. Various members of city staff are present via Zoom, and they must also state their name and title each time they speak. Members of the public are allowed to speak to certain agenda items, and these items are specifically noted on the meeting agenda. I will note that we did not have anyone sign up to provide public comment tonight in person or in terms of via Zoom. I believe we do have one individual that is present to speak for in-person public comment, and we'll give you we'll let you know that when it comes to that item. When we call on in-person public comment, for those without access to technology options, staff present will direct you to the podium to speak, following social distancing and safety protocols, and the regular 3-minute time limit will apply. Again, just if everyone will please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. So we are ready to jump in our first agenda item, which is to approve the agenda. Prior to going into that particular item, I do want to say there is an executive session on tonight's agenda. When the motion is made to recess into executive session, the commission will leave this Zoom meeting and go into a separate Zoom meeting. When the time scheduled for the executive session has elapsed, the commission will return to this Zoom meeting and reconvene our regularly scheduled meeting. The City Commission does reserve the right to amend, supplement, or reorder the agenda during the meeting. I did not say this is Mayor Nanda. Are there any modifications that a commissioner would like to see on this item? Do we have a motion?
It's Commissioner Bully, I move approval.
Vice Chair Finkeldijk, second.
This is Mayor Nanda. We have a motion from Commissioner Bully, a second from Vice Mayor Finkeldijk. Commissioner Bully?
Aye.
How say you? Commissioner, Vice Mayor Finkeldijk?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Commissioner Shipley?
Aye.
Mayor Nanda, aye. That passes unanimously. The second item on our agenda, this is Mayor Nanda again. While we always want to recognize exceptional work in our community during the coronavirus pandemic with our commitment to public safety and for compliance with the Kansas Governor's Order, individuals or groups will not be allowed to attend the commission meetings to make remarks and receive their proclamations. Instead, we will be promoting those proclamations on our social media. We have one proclamation this week, and that is to proclaim May 17th through 23rd, 2020 as National Public Works Week. So we will be promoting that on our social media throughout the week. Next item is our consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Only those items noted with yellow highlight, bold print, and italics print are eligible for live public comment, and the public will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Are there any items that a member of the commission would like to remove from the consent agenda?
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. I'd like to remove 6CA.
Ms. Mayor Nanda, thank you. Any other items from the commission? Are there any items that a member of the public who is present would like to see removed? That they're able to? I didn't check. No, there aren't any. Okay. Apologies. Do we have a motion then for the consent agenda?
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. I'd move to approve the consent agenda with the exception of 6CA.
Commissioner Larson, second.
Ms. Mayor Nanda, we have a motion from Vice Mayor Finkeldye, a second from Commissioner Larson. Vice Mayor Finkeldye?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Commissioner Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Bully?
Aye.
Oh, there we go. There's a distinct lag, so I apologize if I'm talking over anybody. Mayor Nanda, aye as well. That passes unanimously, and we will look at item 6CA.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. I just pulled this. I know there's a lot of work going on with staff and with members of our business community, and I just obviously support the agenda item, but I'd like to get a little update on staff about what sorts of programs they're contemplating, or sort of event or permits they're contemplating or seeing under this item, and what we might see in the future related to that.
Good evening. Amy Miller, Interim Planning and Development Services Director. The item that is before you this evening amends some of our regulations regarding temporary special event permits. Those types of permits are permits that are held on private property. Good examples of those would be the Call Valley Greenhouse that sets up in the Checkers parking lot every year. That is a pretty good example of what we're looking at. We have been in contact with a lot of the business community, specifically restaurants that have been looking at ways to utilize their private parking lot for outdoor dining or extra pickup spaces, something other than what is approved on their site plan. And the special event permit process is the way to accommodate that. It does have some limitations. Currently, each administrative permit is only good for 14 consecutive days, and you can only get up to 4 in a given year. And there is a cost associated with each permit, pretty nominal at $50, but when you add up multiple permits, it gets to be a little costly. So this resolution that you are seeing tonight would first waive the fee. Second, would extend each permit from 14 days to 30 days and would allow up to 6 in a given year instead of 4. And in talking with the business community that we've been dealing with, that really seemed to serve its purpose and solve a need. A lot of the ones that we've been seeing, like I said, are restaurants that are looking to use their outdoor parking area for some outdoor dining in order to space diners out more than just inside the restaurant and be a little creative in how they're serving their customers in light of the pandemic. So this is what is on for tonight. We have also been in conversations with a lot of the business community, even specifically in the downtown area, as to how we could create some flexibility and creatively respond to some of their needs in light of the pandemic. Those conversations are ongoing, and there's multiple different facets that we're exploring. One of those facets you will likely see on your regular agenda next week. And that would involve trying to combine some uses that aren't typically allowed under the code today, and specifically with some flexibility regarding alcohol sales. We are in conversations with Downtown Lawrence Incorporated and multiple business owners regarding some other opportunities that we may have. little early in the conversation for me to start suggesting things, but we are trying to work on all of that and see what we can come up with and see how we can handle that. We have also been in contact with other businesses around town, not necessarily in the downtown area, and are also looking at ways to help them and explore some flexibility in helping them to respond to the pandemic.
Good. This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. So you think if, assuming we pass this tonight, which I'm sure we will we see some of those being approved in the next week or two?
Amy Miller, Interim PDS Director. We already have 3 in the queue that fall under this temporary special event permit. I think one of them may have gotten approved today before the resolution, but we will work on an administrative revision to make it accommodate to the new regulations. And it's also important to note that this resolution would sunset at the end of 2020. That'll also give us plenty of time to take a look at the regulations, see how it's working, and see if we need to make any permanent changes or any more temporary changes or alterations to it.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. I wanted to thank you and all of staff. I know you're working with other members of staff, but for your work on this. I think this is very important and during these times to be flexible and help these businesses and help our community find ways to enjoy these businesses in a safe manner is very important. So I applaud you for that, and I look forward to getting some other things to look at in the coming weeks.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Larson. I would just like to echo that thoughts of Vice Mayor, and just to really appreciate you looking at expanding the bounds under the circumstances, and I encourage you to continue to do that. Thank you very much, Amy.
Mrs. Miranda, is there anything else on this item? I appreciate the conversation around that. Do we have a motion?
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. I would move for approval of adopting Resolution 7321, adopting temporary rules and regulations, suspending and amending certain provisions of the City Code, Chapter 6, Article 15, related to temporary special event permits.
Commissioner Larson, I second.
Ms. Miranda, there was a motion from Vice Mayor Finkeldye, a second from Commissioner Larson. Vice Mayor Finkeldye?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Commissioner Bully?
Aye.
Commissioner Shipley? Aye. Mayor Nanda, aye. That passes unanimously. All right. We are ready to go to public comment. General public comment will be accepted in written form only. General public comments must be submitted 24 hours prior to the start of the meeting. Emails or mail are acceptable, and written comments can also be dropped in the utility billing drop box located at the cutout of 6th Street, New Hampshire. All comments should be marked for the City Commission. To submit general public comment, there is an email there, and as well as an address. We did receive two items of public comment. One of those from Chris Flowers in regard to the CIP and future technological issues in the City Commission meetings, and one from Michael Allman in regard to slow streets. We are ready to move on. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there anyone there for general public comment?
Yes.
Are we allowing that, Porter?
Are you wanting to speak?
I don't believe that we are.
To the specific item?
I've got many things I'd like to say, one general, specific items later when they address the budget.
I didn't think we were taking, well, we are.
In general, in-person public comment is to be
We are-
submitted in written.
We are now doing general public comment.
Right.
I apologize.
So
That's right.
the
I
public
messed up.
comment for the budget item would come after that item is presented, okay? Okay, we're good, Mayor.
I the steps. Sorry, thank you. Okay, this is Mayor Nanda again. Let's move on then to commission items. Are there any future agenda items the commissioners would like to add?
Commissioner Larson, no.
Future work session items?
The budget,
Any other items?
I don't have it in front of me right now, but it was on the agenda.
I wanted to quickly, again, remind everyone to take the census, please. I believe that we were ahead the last time I checked, but it hasn't been very recently that I checked. But please, please take the census. I also want to just acknowledge the press release that came out regarding the TB fire at Haskell, that there are federal agencies working to investigate this because it's on federal property, along with our firefighters and our investigators. If this was an accident, obviously it's incredibly tragic. If it were arson or a hate crime, obviously that is a despicable thing to have experienced in our community. And I am so thankful for our community support to Haskell and the graduates and our Indigenous population here in Lawrence for the overwhelming response to that and lifting up that community because they're part of our community. And then I just want to say thank you to our frontline workers. And I know that I kind of touch on these things every week, but they're out there every day doing really important work and putting themselves at risk. So I am genuinely grateful for that. Any other items from commissioners? Okay. We ready for the calendar then? We added the landing. Any other items?
No.
Okay. So at this point, the City Commission is going to recess our regular meeting to hold the work session. And then once we've completed the work session, we will then resume our regular meeting so that we can go into executive session. So we are ready to recess our regular meeting and we will open our work session. The work session provides an opportunity for the City Commission to discuss items in greater detail. As a general practice, the Commission will not make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Work session topics are eligible for live public comment, and the public will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Individuals wishing to provide live public comment must register as outlined on the top of the agenda. So our first item is to receive an update on the study to expand the west leg of the South Lawrence Traffic Way K10 from the Kansas Department of Transportation.
Good evening. This is Dave Cronin, city engineer. Back in the fall of 2018, KDOT and the Federal Highway Administration began the process for the supplemental environmental impact statement for the South Lawrence Traffic Way. We are now just past the halfway point in the 3-year schedule of the process, and tonight KDOT and their consultant HNTD are going to provide an update on the reasonable alternatives, including details on the tolled alternative. The project team had this presentation queued up to present back in March, but due to the COVID-19, it's been delayed until this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chris Norton. He's the KDOT project manager to lead off the presentation.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. My name is Chris Norton. I am with KDOT. I'm the KDOT project manager for the K10 SLT SCIS. I want to thank you for allowing us to be here and present tonight. As Dave said, we were originally scheduled for St. Patty's Day, March 17th to be here, but something came up, right? But in all seriousness, thank you for your continued leadership and commitment to the city and commitment to keep things going in these challenging times. With that, we do have project team members here tonight from HNTB. We also have KDOT staff from District 1 and Road Design and the Topeka Metro office. Quick update on some previous presentations. We were here last year in April talking about primarily the non-tolled alternatives options with the SEIS. We came back in October of 2019 to give an update on some low-cost intersection improvements at K10 and Wakarusa. That project let last month for construction. It will be completed in this summer and fall, along with a K10 mill and overlay project that it's tied to from I-70 to US 59. With that, I will turn it over to Greg Weathered with HNTB, and he will begin the formal presentation. Greg, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. This is Greg Weathered, the project manager for the South Lawrence Trafficway. First, I guess I want to make sure everybody can see the PowerPoint presentation that I'm sharing on my end.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be with you this evening to give you an update on the South Lawrence Trafficway SEIS. As Chris indicated, we want to give you an update. We want to talk with you a little bit this evening about the new tolled alternative, give you an update on I-70 and K10 alternatives up at the north end. Also share with you what we heard from the focus groups that occurred back in November and December of last year, and then bring you up to speed with where we're at in the process right now in terms of evaluating the reasonable alternatives and next steps regarding public involvement, stakeholder engagement. So just a quick update on the SEIS. We've probably shared this with you in the past, but just want to kind of let you know where we're at in the process. The SEIS is an important part of our process in terms of the environmental documentation. We work through coordination with federal and state agencies and engaging the public with public officials such as yourselves, stakeholder groups. There are a number of steps that we go through and we document the comments all along the way. This graphic here highlights the key milestones where we will get input or present information. And as you can see right now with the red circle, we're in the evaluation of reasonable alternatives right now on the verge of screening those to be able to bring information to the public on that. We started, some of you may recall back in the beginning with this study, identifying 6 initial alternatives. And those 6 initial alternatives were no action, transportation system management, transportation demand management, multimodal improvements, build alternative, add capacity to the existing expressway, build alternative, add capacity freeway, and a build alternative, add capacity tolled highway. These initial alternatives were narrowed to 3 reasonable alternatives through a screening process as those that best met the purpose and need of the project. The 3 reasonable alternatives you see here on the screen are being further evaluated against each other. The no action, which we are required to include as one of the build alternatives as the baseline. Also the build alternative, add capacity freeway, and then the build alternative, add capacity tolled highway. I want to point out, although the transportation system management and the transportation demand management as well as the multimodal, even though they didn't meet the purpose and need as standalone improvements, these improvements can be included as part of the alternative that moves forward as the preferred. This slide here just gives you a representation of how the corridor is divided for the purposes of the study. South Lawrence Traffic Way is highlighted from 23rd Street interchange to I-70. The east leg being from 23rd Street to Iowa, which was completed in the fall of 2016. You see in brown there, and then in blue is the west leg from Iowa to I-70, currently under evaluation as part of the SEIS. I think it's important to note here that as part of the SEIS, we're evaluating physical improvements to the west leg, and considering that the east leg was completed back in November of 2016, one of the primary reasons that it's included in the SEIS is because of the inclusion of tolling as a funding option for the corridor as part of the SEIS. This graphic here depicts the add capacity freeway alternative that we shared at the last advisory group meeting, public meeting. It's focused on improvements of the facility to a freeway standard with either 4 or 6 lanes of capacity as warranted by traffic in the future. It also focused on the types of access changes, improvements that could be made, such as replacing the at-grade signalized intersection at 27th Street Wakarusa with a grade-separated interchange to improve traffic flow and safety. The 4-lane freeway has the ability to expand to 6 lanes in the future towards the median. It also will provide for grade-separated interchanges, as I mentioned, at all access points, including a new interchange at the K-10 Wakarusa, as well as interchange improvements at K-10 I-70, Clinton Parkway, and Iowa. This graphic represents a typical 4-lane highway section. It is similar to what you see today on the South Lawrence Trafficway east leg. So you can see here 2 lanes in each direction, which we refer to as general purpose lanes, and then an open grass median. And the grass median could be replaced with a future additional lane in each direction of travel if and when traffic warrants in the future. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen, and she's going to take us through, Gretchen Ivy, the legislation related to tolling and how that affects the study as we move forward.
Thanks, Greg. This is Gretchen Ivy with HNTB, a consultant working on behalf of the Kansas Department of Transportation. I'm the task lead in charge of kind of the environmental impact analysis as well as some of the tolling evaluations being done as part of the project. Before I go any further, just want to make sure you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, as Greg just mentioned, we had one change happen since the last time we were out to the public to talk with a public meeting on the project. And then also when we were last here presenting for your team. And since that time, there was some legislation passed related to tolling in the Kansas 2019 legislative session. And that kind of influenced some of the different alternatives we were talking about from a tolling standpoint, kind of when we were back last talking with public and stakeholders. At that time, we were considering concepts that would toll all lanes of traffic as we added new lanes, but also existing lanes of the South Lawrence Traffic Way. Since that legislation is passed, it tolls only for existing lanes, and it tolls only for new lanes, new capacity that's added to the facility. And so we've found that existing lanes cannot be tolled. And then any tolls collected on the South Lawrence Traffic Way could only be used on the SLT to improve it in the future. And then communities have to ask KDOT to request a tolling evaluation for feasibility be done before they would decide to do any tolling of the facility. And so these changed some of the concepts that we were looking at from a tolling standpoint. And so if we are going to continue to look at tolling for the South Lawrence Traffic Way and its alternatives, then we had to look at some new alternatives in different ways that we could do that tolling for this project. Greg, you can go to the next slide. And so we looked at the corridor both from the perspective of the west leg and the east leg, since they operate as a system, as Greg was kind of talking about earlier. And so from the range of alternatives that we looked at for the west legs, we wanted to make sure, as we kind of show you these concepts here in a minute, we don't want to necessarily preclude at this time how it might look or function in the future. We just wanted to give some ideas of how tolling could be done now that that legislation has changed, and see if it might be a right alternative, a good fit for the South Lawrence Trafficway moving forward as we make its improvements. We still have some additional traffic and safety analysis that we're currently working on for the project to better understand the potential users that might use this toll facility versus those general purpose lanes Greg was talking about. And so we'll be back at a future time to kind of give the traffic and safety results and how that's operating for the facility. I'm going to show just a couple of alternatives, and remember, just as you look at these, no decisions have been made. We're looking for your input to help, in this decision-making process. And so as we look to leave here and go into a future round of virtual public meetings, we want to have the feedback and input from this group. Greg, you can go to the next slide. And so this particular concept shows kind of a similar, taking that look that Greg was showing a minute ago for the 4-lane freeway concept, and looking at it if we were to add what's called express toll lanes. And so just to kind of outline what's shown on screen, we show one general purpose lane. You can see them on the outside in each direction of travel. And those would represent the free lane that would be given back by legislation and cannot be tolled. And then we would add 2 additional lanes in each direction, separated in this case by some form of concrete barrier, in order to divide those lanes from the general purpose lane. And then we would provide that express service, those express toll lanes in each direction of travel. This particular concept shows 2 express lanes in each direction, but there's a lot of different concepts that are on the table. We'll look at one in a minute that's only going to show 1 express toll lane in each direction, but we wanted to look at that same kind of spacing and footprint as what we did for the future 6-lane freeway, and see what types of concepts might be possible here. And so just to kind of give an overview of an express toll lane and what that means, often they're more for serving through traffic on the facility. So as we think about who might use the express toll lane, a lot of it is the through traffic between, let's say, Kansas City or the southern part of Lawrence, and then onto Topeka. It provides a choice based on traveler preferences. If you are able to go through, you might prefer to use this facility, but if you don't want to pay to use this facility, then you can stay on the general purpose lanes, and so it gives drivers a choice. And then one thing that express toll lanes really provide is a reliable, congestion-free trip. And that's why a lot of major metropolitan areas across the country are looking at these types of solutions to manage their congestion and reliability needs, really for the long term. And then they can be managed over time by adjusting your toll based on the levels of congestion to ensure that they always operate at a good level of service for those that use it. So this one has 2 lanes in each direction. I might have Greg go ahead and flip to the next one, and we can kind of look at what that would look like if we only did 1 toll lane in each direction. And so this concept shows, 1 general purpose lane and 1 express toll lane in each direction of traffic, separated by, in this case, a buffer separation. So that buffer could be anything from a striped line to some form of rumble striping. There's a lot of different buffer treatments that could be used. And then we have a grass median in the middle that we've left, kind of flexibility, just like we have for the 4-lane freeway concept, to potentially add an additional 5th and 6th lane in each of those directions of travel if and when warranted in the future. And so, again, the separation type can vary. We're not necessarily at a stage where we're making any decisions on a buffer versus a barrier separation. It kind of depends on things like operation and maintenance when you think about snow removal or grass mowing in the future. It depends on enforcement needs, safety, and then the levels of traffic that would be using that facility. And so we'd be looking at kind of a range of things, but don't necessarily in the NEPA process make a decision on what that treatment would look like. And so obviously this involves a smaller footprint than the one we were just looking at, and it has a very similar footprint to what we would have with the 4-lane freeway concept. Can you please flip to the next slide? This is just an overview of the full east and west leg corridor, and Greg showed this a minute ago, but this one shows kind of where we would propose to look at access points into and out of the express toll lanes. So if you look at the blue triangle shapes on the map, that kind of shows where there is proposed ingress and egress into and out of the express toll lanes. These are kind of representative areas. No decisions are made that these are the final locations, but kind of looking from a traffic, engineering, and safety standpoint, where traffic might most want to enter or exit to get to certain interchanges or access points along the corridor. We've kind of proposed this as a possibility. And so since it's more of a through facility, you'll note that there's not necessarily these triangles between every one of the access points on the facility. We've really focused in on where traffic wanting to go a little bit longer distance on the facility might most want to do that access along the corridor. And we've included the east leg as well, you'll see from a longer term sense, so that if and when an express lane were ever to be considered or added at that one, we've kind of thought about how it would work as a full system if an express lane were to be added to the South Lawrence traffic way. Go to the next slide. And so we just wanted to touch on the east leg briefly. And, Greg talked a little bit about how it's a system where the east and west leg kind of work together as you travel through Lawrence. And so that's one of the reasons that we wanted that for that continuity. And additionally, as we look at, further expansion of K-10 possibly between Kansas City and Lawrence, we wanted to have the option of thinking about what could happen on the east leg if it were widened in the future, and if an express toll lane might make sense as you think of that longer system all the way between Kansas City and Topeka. So we have a quick concept that we wanted to show there. And so since the east leg is already a 4-lane facility with 2 general purpose lanes in each direction, we kind of looked at one key type of alternative we could apply here. And that was to put an express toll lane in the median in each direction of travel, and then separated by a concrete barrier. So the grass median that would be out there on the east leg today would basically be filled in by these 2 new lanes and then separated by that concrete barrier. And the one good thing that this provides is that it doesn't take additional right-of-way for the east leg. It doesn't cause additional physical, environmental impacts, outside the boundaries of the current outside shoulders of the facility. And so everything we'd be looking at, if and when this express toll lane were built, it would all be kind of within the footprint that's already out there. And again, it also offers that chance to have the continuity between both the west leg and the east leg, but then also as you think about future improvements that could happen all the way to Kansas City. So with that, that's kind of the quick overview of the tolling scenarios that we're looking at within the study. Again, no decisions have been made. We still have traffic and safety and other types of analysis, cost analysis we'll be doing for the project, but thought this was a good time to come back and show you what type of tolling concepts might work for the project based on that change in legislation that's occurred. Greg, I can turn it back over to you to talk a little bit about the North End interchange concepts. And Greg, you may be on mute.
You missed my beautiful speech.
Oh.
Thanks for reminding me. Thanks, Gretchen. Greg Weatherd again. So we wanted to share with this group some things that we've been looking at up at the north end, I-70 and K-10 alternatives. Many of you may recall that one of the primary reasons we are doing the SEIS is based on the feedback that we received from the community at the north end about their dissatisfaction, displeasure, you might say, with the options that were presented for the K-10 I-70 Farmers Turnpike access as part of the concept study. KDOT listened to those concerns, and in concert with FHWA have worked on developing these additional alternatives as part of the SEIS. I might note too that these 3 alternatives that we're going to step through are interchangeable between either the non-tolled or the tolled facility. First, just to kind of orient everybody to the area up here at the north, you can see K-10 running north-south from Farmers Turnpike through the existing interchange at I-70 on down towards 6th Street. I-70 east-west here towards the upper middle of the slide. One thing that it's important to note about I-70, when we were in the concept study as well as the beginning of the SEIS, the turnpike currently has both cash and cashless tolling, where you can use K-tag without cash. And for those that do pay cash, have the toll booths that you can pay. The Turnpike has indicated that they plan to move forward with all electronic tolling, converting the Turnpike, which is a significant development as it relates to the study here, because it does allow us to look at some different things here at the interchange with I-70, simplifying some of the movements there. We don't have to concern ourselves with cash-based users of the Turnpike. US 40, kind of hard to see here, but running from Lecompton Road over here at East 600 Road, you can see the shield here coming down and over towards 6th Street, Farmers Turnpike just to the north of I-70 here, and then I mentioned Lecompton Road out here to the west. So alternative one basically changes the access at K10 I-70 to provide a system-to-system interchange that you can see here in yellow between K10 and I-70 only. The access between K10 and Farmers Turnpike is moved to the west to a new diamond interchange at Lecompton Road that provides strictly just access to and from I-70 and Farmers Turnpike at this location. The Farmers Turnpike is realigned to a T intersection with East 600 Road, and then access provided to the residences that live there as well. What this means for Farmers Turnpike in terms of access to K10 is that they can either get to K10 via the new interchange in I-70 to go through the system interchange at K10 I-70, or they can use US 40 as an alternative route to get from Farmers Turnpike over to 6th Street and K10. And with that in mind, improvements are being considered along US 40 as part of this alternative to improve the safety along the corridor, which would include shoulder widening and intersection improvements along US 40. And I mentioned the reconfigured interchange here that provides access to it from K10 and I-70. Alternative 2. The primary difference between alternative 1 and alternative 2 is providing partial access between Farmers Turnpike and K10 at the current interchange where K10 I-70 exists. So you can see here that the interchange at K10 I-70 is similar to what you see in alternative 1, with the exception that there is a connection made through the interchange to Farmers Turnpike to provide access for Farmers Turnpike drivers to K10 at this location. So here you will have access between K10 and I-70 with the system-to-system, and access between Farmers Turnpike and K10 only. You still have the new interchange out here to the west at Lecompton Road. This one's modified slightly to provide what we call folded diamonds in the westbound direction for people that are getting on and off of I-70 in the westbound direction at Lecompton Road, and then the eastbound direction still looks similar to what was true with alternative 1. Farmers Turnpike looks similar to with the existing condition today, where it is not necessarily the big sweeping curve, but Farmers Turnpike is connected to Lecompton Road with a connection into the interchange. Primarily the purpose of this is because since you still have the access between Farmers Turnpike and K10, you're going to have a fairly significant volume of traffic that will be on Farmers Turnpike coming down this way that will accommodate that traffic that's going between Lawrence and Lecompton and Perry. Again, the system-to-system interchange here at K10 I-70. And I think the other thing to note here as well is that with this alternative, there are no improvements considered along US 40, as no increase in traffic is expected. It is not anticipated that there will be traffic diversion since drivers on Farmers Turnpike can access I-70 and K-10 via the two interchanges at the location shown. Alternative 3, and this is where we see the most significantly the benefit of the all-electronic tolling on I-70. This alternative provides all access to, from I-70, K-10, and Farmers Turnpike at this single interchange. And you might also notice here that there are no at-grade intersections. So today you have the at-grade intersections at the ramp terminals for the eastbound and westbound traffic between I-70 and K-10. With this alternative, since we don't have to collect cash, so nobody has to stop, there's so if you're, just for example, if you're exiting westbound from I-70 to K-10, you can take the system and system ramp, this flyover that goes west to south over I-70 and K-10, but you can also exit and make a right hand into a lane to go north to Farmers Turnpike. So every movement between Farmers Turnpike and K-10 are right only movements. There are no at-grades here, which improves the safety at this location over having the at-grade intersections. Again, with this alternative, there are no improvements identified along US 40, as there is no increase in traffic expected with all the traffic being able to make movements between the three routes here at this location. Other areas that we would like to discuss with you include the K-10 and Wakarusa intersection. Just to get our bearings here, just want to point out some of the existing development. We've got the apartment complex that's at the intersection of Wakarusa and 27th Street, the youth sports complex down to the southwest. We've got the adult softball complex and the Rotary in the northwest, and then we have some of the nature preserves and nature areas in the southeast, and then the West Branch Yankee Tank floodway and floodplain that crosses K-10 just south of Wakarusa and the 27th Street intersection. What you see here is one of the alternatives that is being considered at this location. This alternative was identified as part of the concept design study and has moved forward. As part of the SEIS, this alternative here includes a relocation of the interchange from its current intersection, roughly a little over a mile to the southwest, and then would include a connection from this interchange back to Wakarusa Drive, as you can see here in the dark blue. Which would then provide also access into the youth sports complex. I want to point out what you see here, and this is based on feedback coordination with Douglas County and the City of Lawrence. The future extension of Wakarusa down to intersect with County Road 458, and then a smaller black dash line that shows a alternative connection over here to the extension of Wakarusa Drive, knowing that this is the preferred alternative of the county, and wanted to be able to show that for this group here. Some of the primary reasons why the interchange here was located at this location was due to the potential impact of development to the apartment complex, to the youth sports complex, the Rotary Arboretum, based on the footprint that you see here with this interchange and with the severe skew that's at Wakarusa and K-10 would have some impact there. This is just one alternative that is being considered. Want to make sure that this group understands that there is consideration right now looking at a potential interchange reconfiguration at the existing location. So as we move forward through the SEIS in this process, the interchange could be at either one of these locations. Both are still being considered, but want to make sure you are aware of the fact that there are considerations for interchanges at both, not just what's shown here at this location. So as I mentioned, we are in the reasonable alternatives evaluation phase right now. At this point, we are considering engineering, traffic, and environmental impacts, along with public input to identify the preferred alternative. As Gretchen indicated, we're still working through traffic as it relates to the tolled alternative and what those impacts are. But shortly, we're going to be evaluating the tolled alternative with the non-tolled alternative, and then with input that we get from bodies such as yours and from the public at large, allowing that to help us to move forward with a identification of a preferred alternative. We're also considering different funding options that are being evaluated as part of fiscally constraining this project. Just a quick update. I mentioned of the focus group that we held back in November and December. We held a total of 7 focus groups. One with a group from the Johnson County area for those that commute on K-10 between Johnson County and Topeka, as well as one with a group out of Shawnee County for the same reason. We also had a focus group with the advisory group that we meet with periodically. And then we held 4 focus groups with 4 different groups from the Lawrence, Douglas County area. There were 62 residents that participated from 17 zip codes within these 3 different areas. The 3 major topics that we covered, or what we've covered with you today, we talked about the North End alternatives. I would point out that the overall support from the focus groups was for alternative 3, to have all access at the same location. There was support also for alternative 2, which provided for access at not only Lecompton Road, but the partial access at K-10 I-70 for Farmers Turnpike. We discussed the tolled alternative with the free lane option. Once the groups that we talked with understood what the change in legislation meant in terms of the tolled alternative, that the existing capacity, the existing lanes would remain free. The support for tolling was noticeably higher than it was as it related to tolling all the lanes. And then we also talked about the different funding options. And just very quickly, I might just point out that, in terms of the options that we discussed, state gas tax, there was less than 40% that supported this option. We discussed a dedicated sales tax, which was actually less than 25% support. Transportation improvement surcharges to vehicle registrations. There was more than 50% that were supportive and thought that this was one of the better funding options. Community partnership with the city of Lawrence and Douglas County, less than 40% of the participants were supportive of this option. And as I mentioned, tolling is an option. Only about 33% were supportive until they understood how the legislative changed the tolled alternative, and roughly 2/3 indicated that they would be supportive of tolling under that scenario. Next steps. We are in the process of finalizing meeting with the elected officials. As Chris indicated, we were scheduled to meet with this group back on March the 17th, but due to the pandemic, we had to postpone it. But we met with Douglas County on February 26th. We met with the city of Lecompton on March 2nd. And now we're meeting with the city of Lawrence tonight. We have a virtual public meeting developed and scheduled that will go live this Thursday, May the 14th. And this virtual public meeting will be up for 2 weeks. We are using technology that will allow us to receive comments from the public, to interact with the public in a timely manner as we can. So you can anticipate that starting up this Thursday, May the 14th. Still, any feedback and updates that anybody has, you can go to slt-ks.org to provide comments. And that concludes our presentation for this evening. So we are more than happy to entertain any questions, comments that you might have.
Mr. Mayor Nanda, thank you so much for that presentation. Are there any questions that the commissioners would like to ask of the presenters? Mayor Nanda, again, I'm not hearing any questions. Porter, was there anyone from the public who wished to give public comment on this item?
Not on this item, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from commissioners before we move on?
Commissioner Larson, I would just like to thank KDOT and their staff for coming tonight and presenting this. It's really good to see that third option develop the way it has, as well as the other aspects of it. But I do appreciate their work on it, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation and hopefully getting this done at some point in the nearer future anyway. Thank you.
Mayor, this is Commissioner Boley. And I'd like to echo Commissioner Larson. And I'd also like to thank Greg for explaining, for clarifying that no action is required to be considered as a reasonable alternative. I don't see it as a reasonable alternative. We need to get something done here. So I appreciate that clarification, and it does, I think, provide us with a good baseline.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. I too appreciate the work done, and I'd like to see the different alternatives, and I'm excited to see what the studies show. You know, obviously the tolled road, probably like the rest of the folks, you know, once you know that there is going to be a free lane, the toll road becomes a little more palatable. But it does, just looking at the cost of the added lanes and maybe the crossing of traffic from free lanes to tolled lanes, I'll just be interested to see what the numbers and the science shows on how those work and safety and congestion, and if that makes the tolling worth it. I'm also very, very excited about the work, whatever happens, at Wakarusa. Obviously, that's a very intersection that needs a lot of work. I do like the alternative that was showed that allows some access out to the county, but obviously either access would be a great improvement. So thank you.
This is Mayor Ananda. I think that, you know, I agree with everything said so far. Certainly looking at safety and how these are used by folks, particularly if the non-tolled road is the primarily used road, you know, does that increase safety, and how are we planning around that? I certainly look forward to the public meeting and the opportunity for folks to engage in that. It sounds like an interesting public meeting option that's available for 2 weeks starting on Thursday. So I'm excited to see that happen as well. Thank you for your work on this. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation this evening.
Thank you.
We will go ahead and move on to item 2, if everyone is okay with that. Item 2 is, well, let me ask this, commissioners and others, if you need a break before we jump into this, or if you're doing all right. We've been here for about an hour, but I'm guessing this will be our longer presentation for the evening. How are folks feeling? Hearing nothing, I will just continue on. So item 2 is receive 2020 revenue projection updates and direct staff as appropriate regarding key policy decisions impacting the 2021 budget.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Danielle Bushcutter, and I'm the Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I am going to be sharing in this presentation with our Finance Director, Jeremy Wilmuth, but I'm going to go ahead and kick the presentation off. So we will go ahead and get started and just kind of jump right into it. So the presentation has really been broken out into kind of 3 main sections that we wanted to review with you all this evening. And first is the background. So this is what do we know to be true today, and what information can we really use to help inform the 2021 budget process. So after I go through this section, I'm going to hand it off to Jeremy, and he is going to talk through our current projected impacts for the current fiscal year, talk through the assumptions that we used, and the key funds that we anticipate will be impacted as it relates to COVID-19. And then finally, the final section is kind of our forward-looking view. And this is where we are really going to ask you all for some policy direction and guidance as we work on bringing forward a city manager's recommended budget. So the guidance that you give us tonight will be really impactful as we internally work through the rest of our budget process to bring you a recommendation in July. So to kind of take a bit of a step back, I think it's always important to kind of recognize the timing related to all of this. So the City Commission adopted the 2020 budget on August 13th of 2019. In that budget, we had an increase of assessed valuation of 5%, and an increase in sales tax growth of 2%. The City Commission must adopt the upcoming budget, the 2021 budget, by August 25th of this current fiscal year. And that is a statutory requirement that we must comply with. So with that being said, one of the process questions that we kind of have for you outlined in the later portions of this presentation are related to a revised budget adoption process. So obviously we're here before you tonight asking for some policy guidance. In June, we will bring back the recommended 2021 to 2025 CIP. July 14th will be the city manager's recommended budget presentation. And the change we're recommending is moving the next action item for you to July 28th. So this is when we ask the City Commission to establish the maximum expenditure authority and authorize publication of the budget in our local newspaper. So this is not currently a regularly scheduled meeting. So if the commission is supportive of this, we will have to add an additional meeting in July. The reason that we're bringing forward this recommendation, it's a week later than what we had initially identified in the budget calendar, but it gives you all an additional week to kind of sit with the city manager's recommendation. And it gives you a little bit more time to kind of ask questions before we are coming back to you to establish that maximum expenditure authority. The key variable with this particular item is that there must be 10 days between when we give notice in the paper and when we have our public hearing. So if we did have that action at the meeting on July 28th, that would push our public hearing to August 11th. This is also the meeting that we would have the first reading of the budget ordinance on, with the second and final reading happening the week after on August 18th. which meets our statutory requirement of having the budget adopted by August 25th. So now we want to talk a little bit about what we know to be true about COVID-19. I think at this point we are all very aware that this is an infectious disease. The first known case occurred in December of 2019, and it really started impacting us here in Lawrence, Kansas, and Douglas County in mid-March. So on March 13th, the incident command system for the city of Lawrence was started. Later that day is when city services began to be altered due to the outbreak. And that came in the closure of parks and recreation facilities. Then on March 16th, municipal court canceled all non-essential dockets. The following day, City Hall was closed to the public, and metered parking and enforcement operations were suspended. March 19th, the compost facility was closed and all activities related to that were postponed. And on March 13th, transit services were changed and additional changes were made to that operation on April 7th. Now to kind of take one step, 23rd of 2020, Lawrence, Douglas County Public Health, LMH Health, Douglas County, and the City of Lawrence activated a unified command under the National Incident Management System. Obviously, the first priority of this group was to protect the health and safety of all Douglas County residents and to provide those critical services that are needed during a time like this. The Unified Command is continuously developing a common set of objectives and strategies, sharing information, maximizing the use of all available resources, and really enhancing the efficiency of our workforce. The following day, on March 24th, Lawrence Douglas County Public Health instituted a stay-at-home order, and not too long after that, Governor Kelly also instituted a statewide stay-at-home order. One important date that is not on here, but I do want to make note of, is April 30th, when Governor Kelly announced a framework to reopen Kansas in a set of various stages. So that's another important date that we didn't note here. But I did want to make sure that we had a resource here so that if people want to seek additional information, they can certainly do that. This is the Douglas County landing page. As you know, the city also has additional information on the city website, as does the health department and a number of other state, local, and federal agencies. So the item that we really want to talk about and dig into quite a bit is how COVID-19 will impact our budget and how we want to address that. So a bit of positive news in that our revenues and expenditures for the first quarter of 2020 were really good. They were moving and trending in really positive directions. So I think that's one thing that was looking really, really good before COVID, and we really felt the impacts of that. And you all got a presentation from Jeremy last week on that first quarter report. However, it is anticipated that a number of our major revenue streams are going to be significantly impacted by COVID-19. To kind of narrow the focus a little bit, we wanted to focus on the 6 major revenue streams that we think have the potential to be most impacted by this. So we will go into each of these in more detail, but at a high level, this includes sales tax, property tax, franchise fees, charges for service such as recreation activity and the fees related to that, parking enforcement, transit operations, the transient guest tax, and then gasoline tax. So we'll start with sales tax. This could very well be a significant impact. Duration will really be important as we look at how significant of an impact this is going to be. This is a volatile revenue stream, which on the one hand, I think we're going to see really, really steep declines. On the other hand, when things do get back to where they were previously, we will also likely see a quicker incline in this than we would in some of our other revenue streams. So it does tend to be much more volatile than the other revenue streams that we'll talk about this evening. There are a number of funds impacted. The first four are really the ones that we're going to spend the most time on, which include the General Fund, Capital Improvement Reserve Fund, Public Transportation Fund, and the Housing Trust Fund. There are a little bit of proceeds from the capital improvement sales tax that go into the Equipment Reserve Fund for fire apparatus. And then in our TIF and TDD districts, there's some dedicated sales tax, but that's, we're simply holding those funds. So there's not a large impact to the city in terms of our operations related to those funds. I think it's important to note that we will have March's sales tax figures in late May. There is a 2-month delay in this. So as I think will be clear by the end of this presentation, as each month goes on, we should get more and more information. But the downside is we have to have a budget adopted by August 25th. So it doesn't give us a lot of time with that updated information before we're going to have to, unfortunately, come to you all to make some really difficult policy decisions. One thing I didn't know that I want to on the sales tax side, just to kind of give some context. Sales tax makes up 37.5% of our general fund revenue. So this is really going to be critical for us to watch as it moves forward and as we move forward. The next one is property tax. This could be significant. This tends to be a more stable revenue stream, particularly when you compare it to sales tax. We have 3 funds that are supported by property tax that include the general fund, our debt service fund, and the library. We do receive property tax in 2 installments. The first one was received in January, and the second one we will receive in July. So we should have those numbers in a few months. I do want to call out the good news related to this, and that is we've already received 57% of our budgeted revenues in that first installment. But what we don't know is people's ability to pay for that second installment. So that's one of the key things that we're really going to be watching as it relates to property tax. But we should have that information available in July. And again, just to provide a little bit of context, property tax makes up about 29.6% of our revenue in the general fund. So a close split between sales tax and property tax, but these are 2 major revenue streams as it relates to the general fund that we certainly need to keep an eye on moving forward. The next one that we want to talk about with you all tonight are franchise fees. Again, this could be significant. We don't quite know the impact, obviously, that this is going to have, but it's one that we're also keeping an eye on. This is semi-volatile, just as a revenue stream, but typically we see that volatility related to the weather. So if we have really, really hot summers and really, really cold winters, we tend to see higher revenues in terms of our franchise fees. However, when the temperatures are pretty mild, those you do see a decline in those revenue streams. So typically, that's where we see the volatility, and this impacts the general fund and makes up about just under 10% of the general fund revenues. We will have March figures, I would anticipate, in the next week or 2. So we should be able to see the impact of this sooner than our other revenue streams to kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. And those revenues are based on a percentage of gross receipts. Next, we have charges for service. Again, this could be very significant depending on duration, and it really, the different charges for service that we have are going to be impacted very, very differently by COVID. So the volatility of this really depends on service, but in some of these areas, it's incredibly significant. The funds that are highlighted in orange are really the ones that we're keeping a close eye on. So the public transportation fund, the fares that we receive for use of that service. The recreation fund is obviously taking a very significant, there's a very significant impact on that fund, given much of their revenue is charges for various programs. Public parking is another one that we're watching closely. As I noted before, we're not currently charging for parking downtown or enforcement downtown. So obviously that's going to be a pretty significant impact on that particular fund. And then the golf course is the other one that we're watching closely. This one, we don't quite know exactly what that impact's going to be. They obviously have a very kind of defined season. They are able to operate currently at a reduced capacity, but that is a fund that we were keeping a close eye on before COVID ever happened. So it's one that any impact is going to be significant because the margins in that fund were incredibly narrow to begin with. The next revenue stream that we're going to talk about is the transient guest tax. Again, this could be incredibly significant, and duration is a really critical variable that we're going to be keeping an eye on related to this. This does tend to be a little bit more volatile than some of our other revenue streams, and it impacts our transient guest tax fund. So this is a 6% tax imposed on guests of hotels or other lodging facilities. We do receive this month, this distribution, these proceeds on a quarterly basis. So we will have an idea of the impact in July. With that being said, we have had conversations with Explore Lawrence about the trends that they're seeing, and they provide us with updates on a monthly basis. So they're seeing significant impacts related to the number of hotels that are being utilized at this point, which I don't think is a surprise to anybody, but is something that we need to really keep an eye on moving forward as it relates to the transient guest tax fund. All right, the final revenue stream that we're going to be talking about is the gasoline tax. This also could be significant. This is typically a very stable revenue stream. The only fund impacted by this is the special gas tax fund. All of those proceeds go in there, and we use those dollars to improve various street and road improvements. And again, this is a distribution that we receive on a quarterly basis, so we will know the impact of this in July. I would say this is incredibly difficult for us to forecast because they are dollars that are remitted to the state. The state has a formula about how they distribute them. So it is a very difficult one for us to forecast, but we do anticipate that we will see a decrease in what we initially anticipated in revenue related to gasoline tax. So those are the major revenue streams that we really are focusing on in tonight's presentation. Jeremy will walk through the funds that are impacted by this, but before I pass it off to him, I want to talk about some of the information and tools that we have available as we go through this budget process that I think would be really critical. First is our ETC survey results. So this was a statistically significant survey that we were able to get done before all of this started. And we had a presentation, what seems like years ago, but was only a few short months ago, about the results of that survey. So I think that'll be a really critical tool that we have available to us. We also have our existing strategic plan. We hopefully will be able to move forward in getting our new strategic plan in place. Although, given the timing of everything, the extent to which we're going to really be able to implement that in what we adopt in August is not very likely, but I do think we still got a lot of really great information through our public engagement process and through Lawrence Listens, and so we do have that information available. As well as priority-based budgeting results from last year that were presented about a year ago. That was included in your agenda packet tonight. And then as it relates to our capital prioritization, you all approved the CIP prioritization guidelines, which will give us some really good tools and guidance as it relates to the capital side of our budgeting. And then the final thing that we haven't really unveiled yet, but we will throughout this process, is we have some budget scenario tools to help us gather some public engagement as we get further down this process. And I think that'll be a really valuable tool, especially to gather some public input in maybe some less traditional models and to do some of that virtually. So we're excited to be able to use that. I think it'll be beneficial, but really wanted to kind of call out some of this information and some of the tools we have available to us. And then one kind of final consideration that we wanted to bring forward, this again is kind of on the technical side of things, but we want to get some direction from you all tonight on this as well. And it's really aligning the social service and economic development outside agency applications and tying that to our updated strategic plan. And really what that would do is require the application to be made available after the budget is adopted. So the way that this would function is that we would have a lump sum in the budget and really allocate those dollars after August, after the budget is adopted. And this would be very similar to how we treat our transient guest tax grant, our housing trust fund dollars. And I think one thing that it allows in the process is it gives you all a lot more time to actually consider those requests and allocations. Sometimes it feels a little like we're trying to do a lot at the same time when we have all of those outside agency applications and recommendations to you at the exact same time that we're bringing forward a budget. So this would kind of separate those two processes out, keep in the lump sum, and then we'd have the allocation process after the budget is formally adopted. And then I think you've probably heard me say this enough, but I'm going to say it again, and that is as we go on each month, we will have much more information. We will have better information. We will have actual information, and as we get that, we will be able to update our models and our projections and our impacts in accordance with that information and with that data. The range of impact with this is potentially very significant, but there are a large number of unknown variables that we have, and you change some assumptions, and it can significantly alter the projections that we have in either direction, whether it be a positive or a negative impact. And so one of the key things that we're looking at with this is duration, which is obviously unknown at this point. But what we will do is be sure that, you know, when we come to you all for these key kind of policy decisions, that we'll share the most updated and current information that we have available. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen so that Jeremy can start sharing his, and he is going to talk through the assumptions that we used and really get into each fund that we noted in this portion of the presentation.
Thank you for that, Danielle. While I get this pulled up, just want to take a second to thank Danielle for all the hard work she's done, not only with the CIP reprioritization project, but also working on this analysis and gearing us up for the 2021 budget. She is a tremendous asset to our department. We're very thankful to have her. So thank you for that. We'll go ahead and continue on with our projected impact presentation. What we want to do is talk a little bit about the assumptions that are in the model you're about to see. I think the first thing that we started with was, what can we equate this to? What has Lawrence experienced in the past 20 years that would be anywhere comparable to what we're now currently experiencing? And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side of the calculator you're on, we've never experienced anything like this. But we started with, what do we typically see in a recession? And we started our model, based on that aspect. So we really modeled sales tax by category, property tax. We modeled franchise fees, user fees, et cetera, all based on what do we typically see when the economy starts to slow down. While looking at sales tax by category, we really focused in on those high impact areas. Bars and restaurants make up about 12% of our total sales tax. The retail sales are 21% of our total sales tax. Civic and social organizations make up an additional 12%, and grocery makes up about 13%. So we really wanted to look at those. And then, as Danielle has mentioned a few times, duration is really the variable that we just can't get our arms around because no one really knows. And so what we felt would be most productive tonight would to provide a context. And so we're looking at this as if it were a 3-month event, meaning everything goes back to normal, quote unquote, June 1st, or a 6-month event, it goes back to normal September 1st, and then a 9-month event, we don't see any level of normalcy for the remainder of this calendar year. I'm trouble advancing my slide. There we go. So some of the things we use to create our model, as you can see on the chart before you, relied heavily on the wisdom of the Government Finance Officers Association, the GFOA, great organization that provides not only national but international data that we've gleaned for our model, as well as the ICMA, the International Council of City and County Managers, and other organizations that had industry-specific information that would help us with our modeling. Before we get into the model, I just want to remind the City Commission and those watching the meeting of the fund balance policy that the City Commission adopted in 2017. The full policy can be found on our website under the finance section. But just to highlight the fund balance policy, we strive to keep a 25% reserve of the current budget year's expenditures. So if, when we know what the 2021 budget will be, then the fund balance will be 25% of that expenditure level. The policy goes on to speak to why we reserve such a high level, and it's partly because of this, not specifically a virus, but economic downturn is a significant portion of the fund balance. Other things that are considered for the City Commission to spend fund balance money on would be, a new project or a new capital project that wasn't anticipated at the time of budget. But 20% of the 25% is really set aside for variations in revenue and anything that would be considered a natural disaster or, in this case, a pandemic. So in terms of the model, the only fund that the city currently has a balance target on is a general fund, and that is 25%, as I mentioned. So for purposes of the model, purely to provide context, all other funds that we looked at, we had a 15% target. That's not to say that that is the target. That's not to say that that will be the target when we present a policy to you later this year. But just simply for context and consistency across the funds. We used 15%. So I'm going to jump into the first model here. This is the general fund. The blue bars are tied to the left axis, so that is our revenue. The general fund revenue was anticipated or was budgeted at $81.175 million. If this event occurs for 3 months, we anticipate that that would drop to $73.4 million. If it went 6 months, we anticipate it would drop to $71.4 million. And if it went to the end of the year, we anticipate it would drop to $69.2 million. The green bar is the budgeted fund balance, a projected fund balance target of 25%. So that's why it's a static line that's going across all funds. It's tied to the right axis bar. And so the budget was written with a fund balance of $20.5 million. If this event goes on, what we anticipated was that expenditures would continue. So these charts don't anticipate any reduction of expenses, and that's really so that we can compare apples to apples, because we felt, well, if we start shifting expenses here and there, it's going to be really hard to contextually see what is the gap. And so for purposes of these charts, all of them anticipate 100% expenditure. We, of course, know that won't be the case, but that's the methodology that we used. So fund balance.
Excuse me. Commissioner Larson here, Jeremy. Commissioner Larson here, I did have a question for you. One of the assumptions you're making on this chart is, and specifically I'm thinking about KU, whether or not it's going to start back up or not, partially or all the way or not at all. Is that some of the stuff that was considered in this? What's the variables in this chart?
Yeah, so if KU were not to start the rest of the year, that would be the 9-month duration column. If KU were to start at their normal time, that would be the 6-month column. And KU is not really impacted in the 3-month window any more than it already has been.
So when you say if KU started back up at the 6-month, what happens to that red line at that point?
Well, that's the red line if KU starts at 6 months.
This is Mayor Nutt. I want to remind everyone to say their name when they start speaking.
Sorry. This is Jeremy Wilmot, the Finance Director. What our model is showing is our projections. If this event only lasted 3 months, then the loss of fund balance would be about a little over $3 million. If it went 6 months, the loss to fund balance would be another 1.2, so it'd be 4.2 total. And if it went to the end of the year, the loss would be basically another $2 million. So that's why that line is declining on the way down. Again, these are the variables we use. So it could be that the event goes 9 months, but KU still opens. That would change this model. And that's what Danielle indicated. As we get more actual concrete data, you'll see this model adjust.
Okay. Commissioner Larson here, so I'm assuming then, based on what you're saying, is that this red line represents, if you follow it all the way through to 9 months, that KU does not start back up fully on campus. Is that correct?
This is Jeremy Wilmot, Finance Director. That is correct.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Commissioner Larson.
This is Commissioner Boley. Jeremy, can you give us the number of remaining fund balance or fund balance utilization in the 9-month scenario, please?
Sure. If this model holds, fund balance would drop to $14.6 million. So roughly $6 million less than budget.
Commissioner Larson here, so right now it's at 21 million, is that right?
Jeremy Wilmot, Finance Director, 20.5 million is the adopted budget.
Okay. Commissioner Larson here, what would be the fund balance if we dropped it down to 15%? I mean, what would, not balance, but what would be that difference?
I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understand your questions. This is Jeremy, the Finance Director. You're saying if you chose to go from 25 to 15?
Correct. Commissioner Larson, correct.
1 second. Jeremy Wilmot, Finance Director. Danielle, if you have that, feel free to chime in. I've got to pull up a different chart I don't have up right now. Won't take me too long here.
Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I think I got to the chart just before Jeremy did, but it looks like at the 15% of expenditures for the 2020 adopted budget, the fund balance would be 12.3 million.
Commissioner Larson, thank you, Danielle.
Jeremy Wilmuth, Finance Director. If there's no more questions, I'll move on to the next slide. So looking at the Capital Improvement Reserve Fund, this is funded by a 0.3% sales tax as well as transfers from the general fund. Original revenue was 9.5 million. At 3 months, it would be 8.9 million. At 6 months, it would be 8.7 million, and at 9 months, it would be 8.3 million. So the projected fund balance would drop from 9.6 million to 8 million at 3 months, 7.8 million at 6 months, and 7.4 million at 9 months. So this fund is not what we would consider to be in trouble by any means, other than this is the backbone of our CIP, our capital improvement plan. And so this, these reductions in revenue impact the 5-year capital improvement plan. And so we just want to make you aware of that. Here's the guest tax fund. The original revenue for the guest tax fund was 1.8 million. The 3-month impact we're projecting would drop it to 1.4 million. A 6-month impact would be just over $1 million, and a 9-month impact would be just over $800,000. If we weren't to cut expenses, this fund would actually go negative. So unless the general fund were to cover that gap, we can't go negative under Kansas cash basis law. So either expenses are going to have to be reduced in this fund, or the general fund is going to have to cover the difference. But the projected fund balance in the budget is $461,000. We would project that we'd be $220,000 in negative at 3 months, $593,000 negative at 6 months, and $844,000 negative at 9 months. Moving on to the next one is public transit, and I will say a late addition to this chart is the purple bar you now see, which is the anticipated CARES funding. What we're still trying to assess is what the CARES funding can be spent on. As you can see, that's a significant amount of revenue, almost double what the city normally receives in transit funding. And so we don't want to give the assumption that, this CARES funding is going to completely cover any operating losses and can impact capital, but we just want to show that if we were to receive the total allotment that is been awarded to the city, the revenue would increase by 7.1 million. And so that's why you see the rather large increase in projected fund balance just based on our current projections. However, I'd also add that our expenses would have to increase within the next few years for those expenditures as well. So it would really normalize in the long term. The next slide we want to go over is the recreation fund. As you can see, the original revenue budget for the recreation fund was 5.9 million. We're anticipating at 3 months that would drop to 4.3 million. At 6 months, that would drop to 3.4 million. And at 9 months, it would drop to 2.6 million. This is another fund that will go negative in fund balance if these 3 events occur. The adopted budget was 197,000. The 3-month projection is 149,000 negative. The 6-month is 948,000 negative, and the 9-month is 1.8 million negative. So again, the expenses will have to be reduced in this fund, or those expenses will have to be paid for by the general fund. Our next chart is the special gas tax fund Danielle had mentioned. The special gas tax was originally slated to receive 2.9 million in revenue. We're now at 3 months projecting 2.1 million, at 6 months 1.6 million, and at 9 months 1.1 million. If that were to happen, you'll see the red line going down. Fund balance was originally 1.9 million. That would drop at 3 months to 1.1 million, at 6 months to 623,000, and at 9 months 123,000. So this fund has enough cash to weather this storm, but it would significantly impact our ability to maintain our capital road replacement plan. And the next chart is the housing trust. The housing trust is funded by 0.03 sales tax, and that revenue was originally anticipated at 1.275 million for the year. At 3 months, we're anticipating just close to 1.2 million. At 6 months, 1.18 million. And at 9 months, 1.1 million. The fund balance was originally anticipated to be 478,000. At 3 months, that would be 408,000. At 6 months, that would be 374,000. And at 9 months, that would be 309,000. The next fund is the bond and interest fund. The revenues from this fund are predominantly the mill levy. It's budgeted at 13.3 million. 3-month impact could potentially reduce that to just over 11 million. And we're really just anticipating that sort of flat as sort of a worst case scenario if not so much that the revenue would decline, but the people's ability to pay being reduced. But as you can see from our fund balance level, this fund also has a significant amount of cash that could weather that storm if it were to occur. The other, as Danielle mentioned, the other hard part about property taxes is there's really no good way for us to know how many accounts are escrowed versus how many people are paying in cash. And so until we get those numbers in July, it's really just speculation as to what impact there could be to the bond levy.
Excuse me, Jeremy, this is Commissioner Boley. This bond and interest fund, is this for general obligation debt?
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director, yes it is.
So do we have bond covenants that require us to have a greater percentage than 15% as our fund balance in this?
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director, that's the revenue bonds, and those are paid out of the utility funds. The general obligation bonds are backed by the full faith and credit of the city. So there is no reserve requirement.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Very well, I'm Finance Director, no problem. Moving on to the next one is the Public Parking Fund. This fund was originally anticipated to bring in 2.2 million. With a 3-month duration, we're anticipating 1.1 million. 6-month duration, 920,000, and a 9-month duration, 648,000. This is another fund where there's sufficient reserves right now at 422,000. That drops all the way to 80,000 and then goes negative at 6 months to 148,000 negative, and negative at 9 months to 421,000. The last fund we want to highlight tonight is the Golf Course Fund. Excuse me. The golf course revenue was originally projected at just over $1 million. With a 3-month duration, that drops to 729,000. A 6-month duration drops it to 324,000. That would essentially be the bulk of the golf season. And a 9-month duration drops it to $111,000. So the 2020 budget was adopted with a $207,000 fund balance. The 3-month duration has it a negative fund balance of 82,000. A 6-month duration would be a negative 486,000, and a 9-month duration would be a negative 699,000.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. Jeremy, when you're talking about the 3, 6, and 9-month here, when you say, for example, 6 months, are you taking into account that there could be some activity, or are you saying that we have, no golf going forward?
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. In the golf fund particularly, we had very limited activity that occurs outside of the golf course, very few rentals and leases. So that activity continued, but all greens fees, cart rental, driving range fees, all those were at 0.
Okay.
I know the golf course has opened up. We haven't had enough time to really assess, how that's going to change the model. But as Danielle mentioned earlier, as we keep going through this and we get actual data, the model gets updated with the real data, and that could potentially change the golf course slightly.
Vice Mayor Finkeldye, thank you.
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. So moving on in the presentation, those are the key funds to watch. Really what we'd like to talk with you all about is our key policy direction for the rest of this year and how that shapes our conversation about the 2021 budget. So to kick off the budget policy discussion, we would like to ask, of the fund balance that we have, how much are you willing to spend down? And that's really more, not just 2020, but also 2021, because we sort of need to know what that end target is so that we can shape revenue and expenses to align with that direction. And then I believe the current policy allows for a 5-year payback to get the fund balance back to the 25%. And our question is, are you comfortable with that? Would you like to see it repaid more expeditiously? Or given the pandemic, would you consider changing the policy that would relax that requirement?
Commissioner Larson here. A question before we get to that. So if we were to drop the fund balance down to 15%, how far would that money go? Would that be completely wiped out by the end of the year, or would we expect something different from that? Can you answer that?
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. It's very difficult at this time to answer that question given all of the unknowns. So based on our original projection, we said that if this event goes through the end of the year and we had full expenditure in the general fund, our fund balance would drop to 14.6 million. At 15%, I believe Danielle said, was 12.3. So that would provide around a $2.3 million cushion for either revenues we didn't anticipate that also slumped or added expenses that weren't reimbursed through COVID grant procedures. I guess to also answer that question, we would need to know, are you wanting the general fund to cover the shortfalls in the recreation fund, the golf fund, and the guest tax fund?
So, Commissioner Larson, are you asking what funds we would be willing to cut? Is that what you're asking? Or just focus on the ones you just mentioned?
Jeremy Williams, Director of Finance. Under the cash basis law, we cannot spend money that we do not have. And so if we don't cut expenses in the guest tax fund, the recreation fund, and the golf course fund, and possibly public parking, then those funds would go negative, which isn't allowed under the cash basis law, which technically means the general fund would write an IOU to those funds to pay that difference. And so then it wouldn't drop to 14.6 million. It could drop around 10 million, which would be even greater than 15%.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's answering your question. That's sort of the difficulty of saying if you want us to hold general fund balance to 15%, then it cannot cover the shortfalls of all those other funds, I guess might be the best way to answer that.
Commissioner Larson, and that would be just through the end of this 2020, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
This is Commissioner Boley. I'd like to ask a question about this direction that we're providing on fund balance. It would seem more appropriate for us to be talking about where we wanted the general fund balance to be at the end of 2021 so that you could take into account not just what's going on in 2020, but also 2021 as you craft that budget. Is that correct?
That is correct. Sorry, this is Jeremy Williams, Finance Director. That is correct. You can parse it one of two ways, but at the end of the day, what we're really asking is, where do you want fund balance to be at 12/31/21? And then based on that, we have to make adjustments to revenues and expenditures in both 2021 and 2020 to meet those expectations.
Commissioner Larson here, so that would essentially give us a 1 year and about 7-month look on this scenario or on this situation we have right now? If we're looking at going through 2021, is that what I understand? More than a year and a half of view of where we want to be at. Is that correct?
Jeremy Williams, Finance Director. That is correct.
Okay.
This is Mayor Ananda. Are there any other questions for Jeremy or Danielle before we open public comment?
Commissioner Larson here. Are we going to go through any more of the slides, Jeremy?
Jeremy Williams, Finance Director. I'm happy to go through all the slides if you'd like to do that before you open it up for public comment, or that may be more fair to them since they only get one bite at the apple.
This is Mayor Ananda.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying that I agree with finishing the presentation. I wasn't paying attention to, I wasn't looking ahead.
Jeremy Williams, Finance Director. The other question that we'd like to pose to you all is, Based on what you've heard, are you concerned about any of the assumptions that we've made? Again, it's very nebulous. It's very difficult for us to try to pin this down much further than we have for you, given the privacy laws that are in place in terms of sales tax. That information really can't be shared beyond the levels that I've already shared with you. But again, for purposes of our analysis, we anticipated that the longer the duration, the more severe the reduction to each of these groups. In other words, if the city doesn't open Mass Street for the rest of this year in any meaningful capacity, that has a more dire impact to sales tax than if the city opens Mass Street in September. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. But again, because duration is such a critical component of this entire puzzle, that's really why we wanted to provide the context of 3, 6, and 9 months. And I guess what we're asking for, what we're looking for, is whether you agree with those assumptions or you'd like us to run a different model. So those are some questions to consider as we move through. The next thing we wanted to show was, sorry, somebody speaking.
Yeah, Commissioner Larson, I just wanted to say that, I'm a little bit hesitant or concerned about making any decision tonight or any comments tonight regarding where we want to be in the end of 2021. I realize we got to have some level of direction, but with the understanding that we've got to be flexible enough to continue to look at this model consistently going forward and not wait for 3 months from now and redo the model. Is it my understanding that we're going to look at this model continuously throughout each week and each month to see where we're at with it?
Chairman Wilmot, Finance Director. I don't believe we'll be looking at it weekly because we don't get data that quickly, but we will be looking at it monthly.
Commissioner Larson, thank you.
Jeremy Wilmot, Finance Director. Just a few more slides here. What we wanted to show you was some of the modeling that we've seen other organizations, a V-shaped recovery. The chart that you see in the top left would be what we would consider a traditional recession, where it's a very a quick dip, but then a gradual recovery. The big V would be a deeper recession, if you will. A W style recovery would be if this event occurred and then there was a relapse. And then the L recovery, which is what I personally think we're probably looking at, is that there's going to be a noticeable drop of revenue, and it will probably stay that way for a considerable amount of time, just given the economic impact to the individual. As you all know, Lawrence is currently experiencing 14% unemployment. Those are unheard of numbers for this city, for this state, for our nation. And the federal government is helping. Obviously, they're doing what they can to help. But there's people that have to make rent. There's people that have to pay their bills. And unfortunately, they're going to slip farther and farther behind every month that this goes on. And so I think we have to be mindful of the fact that even when we consider the virus to be at a manageable level and we start to open things back up, disposable income most likely will not be what it was in 2019 in the short term. And so these are some of the models that we're reviewing as we look at our model. Next, I wanted to just talk a little bit about government finance philosophy in a nutshell. There's really three things that we can adjust in the model, and that's service level, that's taxes, and that's charges for services. And so if someone were to say to you, I really want to keep service levels the same, but I don't want higher taxes, our only answer to that is that we have to increase user fees. And if they say, I really want to keep services stable, and I don't want you to increase my user fees, as a government, our only answer there is that we have to increase taxes. If they say that I want low user fees and I want low taxes, our only answer there is that we have to reduce services. And so this model here is really just to hopefully illustrate to people that unfortunately you can't have it all. It's a balancing act with three components, and two of them have to support the third one. So if it's the commission's desire to cut taxes and keep services stable, we will have to increase user fees to cover the whole. If it's the commission's desire to keep taxes low and keep user fees low, we will have to reduce expenses. There's no other way to solve that problem save grants, and grants are the unknown variable right now. Of course, we know that we received a little over $400,000 in CDBG funds. That doesn't necessarily cover everything. We're also applying for grants and trying to position ourselves in that regard. But I guess what I wanted to do is just show in a normal world, this is sort of that model. If you want to lower taxes and you want to lower fees, then our only option is to reduce services. Just a couple more slides here. One of the things we wanted to reiterate as a staff, and I know Craig really wants to drive this point home with you all and with the community, is that we're going to have to work through this together. I clearly don't have all the answers. I don't suspect that anyone on this call tonight has all the answers. But together we're going to do what we can for the people of Lawrence to continue to provide the excellent services that we've always provided, and to maintain the quality that people have come to expect from the city. And that, unfortunately, that means that very difficult decisions are going to have to be made. And what we're trying to do tonight is just start that conversation so that as we very quickly put together the 2021 budget, it's not a wide variation from what you all are expecting or anticipating, and that the public fully understands and is engaged in the process as we work through it. And so some of those technical questions that we just want to make sure we walk away here tonight understanding. The first one is, do you all agree with the revised budget calendar that we've submitted, knowing that in so doing, we're going to have to add a special meeting on July 28th. This was really to give you a little bit more time between the presentation of the budget and when the resolution to set the levy for the year has to be published.
Commissioner Larson, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, to make the normal calendar, we'd essentially be doing it all in one night like we did last year. And we really wanted to provide more flexibility and time for you all to consider the implications of the resolution. The only way to make that work is to have a special meeting on July 28th.
Commissioner Larson, I really appreciate actually the opportunity to have more time to review the material, and I appreciate it providing at least a two-week time period in between. So I'm very much in favor of having that special meeting.
This is Mayor Nanda. Jeremy, are you asking us to answer these questions now? Are you going through these so that we can get public comment and then come back and talk about the answers?
Chairman Wilmot, Finance Director. Yes, I'm just going through them so the public is aware if they're listening in on the phone and don't have access to the internet and aren't seeing the presentation. So if you'll indulge me, I'll just go through the rest of these questions real quick and turn it back over to you. The next question we'd like to get a answer on tonight is one that Danielle had asked about deferring social service and economic development agency outside funding applications until after the budget is adopted. Prior prior to this year, that isn't the way it was done. And so we just want to make sure that everybody's in agreement and understands that as we move forward. And then the big questions, the ones that are most impactful to the operation, where I anticipate we'll spend the majority of our time tonight. The fund balance question, are you willing to reduce the general fund target from 25%? Obviously, we threw out round numbers, 5, 10, 15, 20%, just to get the conversation started. And then if we were to create a target or set levels for those other funds that we mentioned, what target would you be comfortable with in those funds as well? The second question, as I mentioned, is that the balance or the fund balance policy currently calls for a 5-year repayment period. Is that sufficient? Would you like to see it sooner than that? Or would you be willing to amend the policy to make it a longer duration? And then, again, are there concerns with the assumptions that we've made? And lastly, as we move into the 2021 budget, are there service level reductions you would consider, either temporarily or permanently? And then if there were fee and tax increases you would consider, would they be a property tax, a sales tax, a recreation fee? Or are there fees or taxes you absolutely would not consider? I believe we're finished. Our third question is, do you continue to support the market pay for all employee groups? That'd be the primary pay plan. That's the group that houses all members of the city that aren't a part of the IAFF or the LPOA, excuse me. And then we would like to get a feel or a consensus on the most important things that you would like the 21 budget to consider, and that's level of service, charges for those services, or taxes to pay for those services that aren't covered by a fee. I believe those are all the questions I have, and Danielle and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, or I guess just turn it back over to you, Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Nanda. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Danielle. I really appreciate your presentations. Y'all are so thorough and clear, and I don't know, I just appreciate those, so thank you. Do we have any questions from commissioners at this point?
Commissioner Larson, I do have one question. The last item that you talked about was the support of the market pay, and you'd indicated the IAFF and the LPOA, those cannot be included as part of that discussion. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, and this might be a question better for Tony or someone in the attorney's office, but yes, they do have an agreement. I'm not sure what the process is to amend that agreement, but again, I think what we're just asking for universally is, does the commission continue to support the city's push for market pay for all employees? And we just wanted to, we didn't want anybody to feel left out. So when we say all employees, we mean the primary pay plan, the IAFF, and the LPOA. Does that?
Sure. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Mayor Nanda, any other questions before we open it up for public comment? Okay, Porter, I believe that you said we had one individual here for live public comment.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Chad Osdale. I'm with MSO. I was here tonight to ask that you consider funding our merit pool this year. I realize that the coronavirus makes things a little tight, but I would also like to see something a little different rather than normal, seeing as how the position we're in right now is a little unnormal. Instead of taking our merit raise and not funding our merit pool, maybe we should think about taking the money from the top instead of the bottom. I mean, I've never heard of any of the management taking any cuts in their raises or in their salaries, but the people out on the street working through this pandemic, being told that they are nothing but efficient, just effective, are not given anything extra. We were denied our merit pool last year. I'm sure we'll be denied again this year, and I'm fairly sure we will be denied again next year. Needless to say, this is why the city doesn't want us to join the Teamsters, because we actually have somebody to speak for us and defend our rights. But they have squashed that apparently, and now they know that they can take anything from us they want. They can do whatever they want, no matter what's written down. We do things the way we want. We just do things differently here. And I believe that it's time to change, taken from the little guy, and instead, maybe some of these high-paid management raises could be denied instead of ours. You know. Then I also had a question as to the sewer water testing for the coronavirus. Tells me that we can find out the percentage of infections in our town. We cannot test every person in this town with a swab, even if we had the tests. But if you test the sewer water, you can find out the percentage of your community's infection rate. Everybody screams at the top of their lungs, testing, testing, testing. But when you have a chance to do some testing that doesn't cost a fortune, you scratch your head and wonder, should we? I can't believe that every university in the country isn't doing these testings. I'm sorry, it's just a little upsetting, and I wanted you to know how I felt. I appreciate your time.
Mayor Ananda, thank you. We'll bring it, there's no one, is there anyone else, Porter?
No, that's all.
Okay. So we'll bring it back up to the commission.
Mayor, this is Craig Owens, City Manager. I just want to put a little context to the conversation now that you're about to have. And really, this is to help guide us into the budget process. And I'd say, even if we were not in a, this unusual year in a pandemic, this is what I'd be asking you about going into the budget cycle. So you can expect to do this next year and the year after. These are general guidance pieces for us. It might not always be exactly these questions, but I like to, when we're going in, ask these general questions so that you can give me some guidance. So if you just give a little, it's more than we have right now. As we're starting to program the budgets and we're having long meetings and looking at everything. So I want to take a little pressure off, because some of these questions would insinuate that you've got insights that even the great world economists aren't sure about right now. And that's not what we're necessarily asking. We're kind of showing you worst case scenarios and the range of things that could be in this downturn, and asking you, are you reading it the way we're reading it? So I want to make sure to put context to the conversation that you might have, and hopefully we'll all participate in. But also, if you give some guidance, especially the Venn diagram, which is probably uncomfortable but is kind of reality, that will help us to not spend time, wasted time developing a lot of different scenarios that really aren't what you're interested in. And so we can bring you a budget proposal that's as close to possible, as close as we can get to what you and the community are looking for.
This is Mayor Nada. Thank you, Craig. I'm wondering if the commission would like to take this one question at a time, and we can kind of read each one out loud and have a discussion about it. Does anybody have any? I mean, we can go all out chaos method as well, just talking about what we want to talk about. But it might be helpful to break it down that way. Does anybody have thoughts on that?
This is Commissioner Boley. I like the idea of going through one at a time.
Commissioner Larson, I agree.
Okay, this is Mayor Nanda. So we'll start looking at the first question that was posed to us by Jeremy. Do you agree with a revised budget calendar and direct staff to add a city commission meeting on July 28th?
Commissioner Larson, I think I answered that prematurely, but yes, I do.
Commissioner Bowley, I support that.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldine. I like how they start with the easy questions. Yes. Do they get harder after this?
Commissioner Shipley, do you have thoughts on that one?
I agree. I think it's an appropriate action. This is
Okay.
Sorry.
This is Mayor Nanda. Okay, thank you. So I think we have consensus around question 1. Yay. Question 2 is, do you direct staff to defer agency allocations for social service and economic development agencies until after the budget is adopted? And so this would be that lump sum, and then we would put out the applications after adoption of the budget.
Commissioner Larson here, I am very much in favor of this. This is something that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, is to follow this type of a process.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldine. I do like that process and the idea of taking it up outside the budget. You know, my only concern is, you know, when you've set the amount of money at the beginning, you know, 3 or 4 months in advance, and then you have a discussion, for example, about economic development agencies. Right now, to give more to one, you're taking it away from the other, in theory. You lose a little bit of your ability to say, you know what, these are all important, we should fund them all more or less, because you set that out in advance. But maybe, Craig, you could talk to us about how you see that working, you know, not being through that process. Do you see that having some flexibility there, or is it we have $1 million and we're going to, you know, pit one social service agency against the other and be done? Or would there be some flexibility there?
Sure. This is City Manager Craig Owens. Thank you. This is priority-based budgeting. And so what I do like about this, this would gain us a little bit of time so that we can complete our strategic plan and determine priorities in the abstract, if you will. And then when we're allocating funding, everything going into a budget, especially with the cycle here in Kansas where you're adopting your budget so much before the beginning of the fiscal year, you're having to look into the crystal ball, you know, many months anyway. So we are going to be on a quarterly budget review and adjustment schedule so that we can make adjustments as they come up. And if we get to even before the beginning of the fiscal year, when we've made some of these allocations and find that it may be that we didn't put enough aside, those are conversations that we can still have. I would just say this particular segment of the budget, while it does substantial good in the community, it is a very small sliver of our overall budget picture. And a lot of flexibility built in so that we could make some adaptations if you really felt like, oh, this particular year, there were so many great requests, we needed to increase the pie. And let's go figure that out. I really believe we'd have flexibility. Now, if you told me that it was something on a much more substantial fund or a much more substantial allocation, that might be a little more difficult to do. But I think there's enough flexibility within this to do this. I certainly think it's worth a try. And I also, you said pit one against the other. Really, you know, to some extent, every dollar that we spend is pitted against another priority. And that's why I love that we're going down this road of priority-based budgeting, and we talk about what's most important, and we fund robustly those things that we need to do and allocate on that basis in the abstract, instead of you know, creating almost an artificial game of just a small amount of money, you know, of things that are apples, oranges, and bananas, trying to decide between them.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldine. Thank you for that. And I agree. I think it's worth trying. I think it's a good idea. And that explanation helps me understand what we might see. So thank you.
This is Mayor Nanda. I think that one thing that we might consider is a lot of our, particularly nonprofit agencies, might be on an annual fiscal calendar of June 1 or July 1 to June 30. And particularly when working on grant applications. And, this might be the case anyway, since we would still approve the final numbers in our final budget in August. And so it might not make an impact, but it might on their budgeting process and their grant application process, et cetera. So that might be something that we just want to reach out and ask about, at least so that this isn't a surprise to anybody, because I do think that it's a good idea. And once we've done it a few times, those pain points will be worked out. But I also don't want anybody to be shocked by a change like that. But I do support it.
The City Manager Craig Owens, the funding wouldn't start until the beginning of the fiscal year anyway, and I think we would still have this done in plenty of time to give warning, or people would know what to expect within the cycle. That's the intent.
So it wouldn't start until, this Mayor Nanda, until the calendar year versus fiscal July 1 year?
The funding probably would not be any different on schedule than what it is currently. Anybody can correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think our intent is just to not put it put the funding decisions in the same time that we're doing the rest of the budget. But we'd still have the allocations determined before the beginning of the disbursement that they would normally expect. Again, somebody correct me if I'm out of step on that.
This is Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I want to confirm that we would still want to have the awards happen and the agreements in place by the end of the year like we would typically. And I wouldn't anticipate the disbursement in those agreements be any different than what the agencies have already experienced.
Mayor Nanda, thank you.
Mayor, Commissioner Shipley, thank you. That was exactly what my concern was, and I appreciate Danielle and the city manager addressing that. And you too, Mayor. Thanks.
This is Commissioner Boley. I just want to see this as a step forward in our priority-based budgeting. We've recently adopted priority-based budgeting, and we're still learning about it. So I appreciate staff bringing this to our attention. Thank you.
Mayor Nanda, it sounds like we have consensus on both items 1 and 2. So only, I think, 3 more slides to go. The next question we have before us is how much fund balance are you willing to spend down? And there are a few options on that slide. Mr. This is Mayor Nanda. I think I would like to go ahead on this one because I kind of had a question for Jeremy. I know that you have, the 3, 6, and 9 month scenario. There's also the potential for the L outcome, and I appreciate that you're really looking at that worst case scenario to provide your assumptions from because, well, I grew up in a Catholic community, I guess. But I think that I'm curious if there is an opportunity to say, this percentage if this lasts 3 months, this percentage if it lasts 6 months, this percentage if it lasts 9 months, etc. Even if it's like a 5% increment over time, and whether or not that's one, feasible or makes sense, and 2, responsible.
Jeremy Willen, Finance Director. We had considered something fairly similar to that. The difficulty from a budget perspective, though, is in the next 60 days, we need to decide where 2021 is going to end. And if it's the 9 month scenario, we won't even know. And so I think that's what makes it a little more challenging. What I would say is, as City Manager Owens has pointed out, these things can be adjusted as we continue to experience this event. So you all could give us direction tonight based on the information you have in front of you that helps us craft the original budget recommendation. And as we move through this process together, those assumptions that we have and the direction that you've provided could all adjust in concert, if you will, as we work through this together. Craig, I don't want to speak for you, but does that?
Yeah, City Manager Craig Owens, that's exactly, we're going to be in a dynamic state for probably the next 18 months. And we're going to be making adjustments and bringing to you, hopefully smaller decisions, but we're going to be making adjustments and having conversation and being transparent to the public about what we're experiencing. And as we're experiencing it, that just, we're an effect of what the community is experiencing. So, it'll be a good conversation from a number of perspectives. But as we're trying to program a budget that's going to get adopted, our best efforts to get that right, that's what we're talking about. So again, to take some pressure off, if you say we really like to try and end 21 and not get below 10%, and we see things are really doing better than expected, or we program the budget and say, wow, the only way that's going to happen is if we do some pretty drastic things. And are you sure? You're going to be able to change your mind because we're going to know more and we will have had time to do it. So I'm taking a little bit of pressure off. I'll take any info I can get tonight, but I'm taking a little bit of pressure off that you're trying to just fine tune it tonight. That's not really where we're at. But if you tell us, Craig, we're really uncomfortable with dropping down, below 10% because we don't know what 22, 23 might look like. That would just put us too deep to get out. Then that is a useful piece of information.
This is Mayor Anand again. Thank you. I appreciate that because I see the response to this for both us in guidance as well as you all as you're going through this as a series of if-then statements. So if X, then Y, etc. And so for me personally, using that series of if-then statements and looking at it as blocks over time, in addition to the likelihood of duration as we gather more information over time throughout the rest of the year, then I would be comfortable saying, here's a bottom line, here's an increment level I would like to stick to, let's do that. So that you're not pinned in by a bottom line and you're not pinned in by necessarily a decision. That's kind of where I'm sitting. I don't know what other commissioners think about that.
Commissioner Larson here, and I'm of the thought process right now of I would like to see us look at the potential worst case scenario and work our way up from there and make changes as we go along so that it's more of an upward movement versus having to continually cut as we go along.
I guess I'd like this, Commissioner Boley, I'd like to say I'm also interested in trying to consider the worst case scenario. And I see that as the 9-month duration with the L recovery. That seems to me to be about as bad as it could get. And when when I look at it that way, based on this presentation, and you look at the fund balance policy where we have a 20% allocated for liquidity and revenue stream volatility, I'm looking at essentially saying let's consider using half of that, which would be 10% between now and the end of 2021. That would take us down to 15%. There's a 2.5%, which is for equipment purchased on as a pay-as-you-go basis. I'd be willing to talk about that as well. But my concern is that if we have the 9-month duration with the L recovery, at the end of 2021, we're still going to be having to adjust, our revenue and expenditures into balance, and we'll need more of the reserves to do that. So that's kind of where I'm looking at right now.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. A couple thoughts on that. I mean, I certainly agree we should be looking towards the 9-month duration. I do think there's a difference. I had a couple conversations with folks today about making sure that the duration of the pandemic certainly could be different than the duration of the impact on our income streams. As people adjust to ways of purchasing, to ways of doing things, the pandemic could still be around. The duration of that, we could be 18 months from a vaccine. That's what people were saying. Well, we're 18 months away from the end of the pandemic. I think that's true, but you also could see changes in the way people purchase, the way people buy things. So I do think the 9 months is a good indication. I think we should be looking at that. I would echo what Commissioner Bully just said about the purpose of this fund, and clearly a large part of this fund is to in case you have an economic downturn or a natural disaster, and clearly we fall in that category. So I'm certainly willing to go down probably as low as the 15%. I would note, however, and I know it's not really on the question tonight, but I do think 2020 probably gives you the chance to do some kind of one-time budget moves, one-time reductions, those sorts of things that you couldn't repeat year after year, but you might be able to get away with one time. And so I know at some other point we'll be looking at the expense side of this, but I would hope that when we say the 15%, I look at that as being definitely at the end of 2021, maybe not using as much of it in 2020, but saving that for 2021 and as part of that budget. Because I think there's some things we might be able to do this year with expenses that we couldn't do continually. But I certainly would support a target in that range.
Mayor, Courtney Shipley. I think I agree with Commissioner Bully if I understand what he's saying, and Commissioner Finkeldye. While it is an emergency and we're using that money, I do kind of like the 15%. It has this Goldilocks-ness about it. I'm afraid to go too low for the exact reason that Commissioner Bully mentioned, which is to be thinking ahead. And even if there is a vaccine, it could take up to 4 years for it to be disseminated to everyone to a point where it would be useful. So that sort of brings us to the 5-year question a little bit. I still think that 5 years would be an appropriate timeline. I don't know that I would want to change that.
This is Mayor Nanda. I guess a few other factors that I want to throw out on that first question is, I think that right now we also have some emergent needs that we might not have so extremely over the next few years, while we will still continue to have impacts. And, given the fact that these are for natural disasters, emergencies, et cetera, one of my top priorities is taking care of our residents and having the leeway to do that in unique ways that maybe we haven't even thought of yet, or concerning issues that haven't come up yet. And so I think in balance with that, and so talking about that kind of tri-issue conversation, where do we lie in providing services, not only maintaining the ones that we have, but ones that maybe we haven't provided historically. And so I think there does have to be some balance as we're having that conversation about wanting to be conservative in our spend down, but also acknowledging that right now we're in the thick of it, and we we are in like a crisis mode where people are having concerns and issues that we haven't had to address, or at least not to this level before. And so balancing that fiscal conservativeness of saying, you know, here's a hard number versus what do we need now that we're not going to need next year? What do we not need now that we're not going to need next year? And what services are we providing that are kind of a one-off thing? It's a lot of factors, but none of them are unimportant to me anyway.
This is Commissioner Boley. I appreciate those concerns, and if there's one thing that we've learned through this event, I think it's that, you know, we work well with partners. The Unified Command's done a good job. And as we consider, you know, our funding and, you know, the needs of the community, I think it's important to remember that we're not the only government around, and that the counties, and people may not know this, but the county's revenue stream is probably much more stable than ours because we're so dependent on sales tax revenue, which is volatile, while the county is largely funded by property tax revenue, which may be impacted by this, but is generally more stable. So I think we may need to say, let's think about what we can do as a community, not just what can we do as a city.
Commissioner Larson here, and I appreciate Mayor Ananda's comments about making sure we take care of our community members, and I would say anything that is decided tonight that as well as going forward with how staff handles this, is that the context will always be, as far as I'm concerned, is any decisions that are made will be in the context that our citizens, our residents, our community members are taken care of first. And that is how I would like to proceed, regardless of what numbers are given tonight. And the expectation is that staff will follow through with that very thought in mind.
This is Mayor Ananda. Craig, is that sufficient on question one there? Do you feel like you have some pretty clear guidance?
Yeah, that was helpful. Make sure I'm on. Yeah, this is Craig Owens, City Manager. That's helpful. Like I said, I wasn't trying to get you all to give me an exact, precise number, and I'll agree on it. But I think that does give us some general direction of that we've got a little latitude to use reserves for these exceptional times. But we want to keep some back so that we can respond to what we don't know is ahead.
Mayor Ananda. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on to question two, which is how quickly do you want that reinstated? I know Courtney answered that to some extent. I think sticking to the 5-year goal is ideal, but obviously keeping an eye on that as time passes. Other thoughts on that?
Commissioner Boley, I think for now that the 5-year period is worth keeping.
Commissioner Larson, I'm fine with that too, with the idea that these are very dynamic decisions we're making and that they'll be changing pretty, possibly pretty frequently. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Finkelstein, I agree. I think for where we're at now, we would keep that as a goal, and we'll watch as we develop in the coming years.
Okay, well, this is Mayor Ananda again. It sounds like we have some consensus around question two, so we can move on to question three. Are there concerns with this? Oh, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, just a moment. We have dealt with the fund balance question for the general fund. Did staff need guidance with regard to other funds?
City Manager Craig Owens, we really do. I will say my recommendation right now is that we stabilize the funds with general fund subsidy as necessary. That's kind of what you're going to get unless you send me in a different direction, because we obviously, if we're saying that we're going to favor the very conservative 9-month numbers, then we've shown you that several of them dip below acceptable legal limits, and so we're going to need to stabilize those, and we would do that, which is going to be a little bit more of a lug on the general fund. This is probably not for tonight, but we're also having conversations. When you get a first-year city manager and a second-year finance director, we're going to have some interesting conversations which are happening and popping up at all the funniest places, but one of those is, why do we have so many of these funds? And so you see things like the impact of these very special segregated funds, and we're having these questions of, well, yes, of course we're going to have to prop them up, but why wouldn't it be already part of the general fund? So I'm not saying that there's a good answer for that either way, but those are the types of things that we are talking about already. But I think we should be stabilizing those funds, assuming these very dire predictions, and we've got to make sure that we comply with legal requirements on that.
Well, I mean, if the question is to this, Commissioner Boley, if the question is to reduce the target in other funds, I would say that you keep the target at 15%, but for those funds that would be going in the red, just try to get to zero and do the best you can with it.
We'll keep them solvent at a minimum,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah, but I don't see a reason to change the 15% for the other funds as a general rule.
I think that's helpful. City Manager Craig Owens, I think that's helpful. Jeremy, Danielle, you good with that?
Finance Director Jeremy Wilmoth, yes, sir.
This is Mayor Nanda. I think that, you know, in regard to those other funds, that does kind of open some other questions where, you know, particularly with Parks and Rec, as we look at social distancing issues and requirements over time, there are going to be some costly programs, as I was looking through our 400 pages of reading this evening, that may not even be feasible, and so those would automatically not only be saved costs, but potentially some lost revenue, which you've accounted for there, but maybe not the cost savings as much by not instigating those programs, particularly during the summer, during athletics, maintenance on fields and things like that. So I do think that there are some savings that we can consider that I hope we look at prior to pulling from the general fund to balance those out.
This is Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. Yes, again, for purposes of tonight, we were trying to provide as clear a picture as we could, and we really felt if we started to tinker on the expense side with what we may or may not see as feasible, it really just moved that bright line and made it very murky. And so the purpose tonight was really just to focus on revenue. Of course, if things do not open and those expenditures do not happen, those underspendings will benefit those funds and not require as large a commitment from the general fund.
Ms. Mayor Nanda, thank you. And thank you, Stuart, for bringing that back around to us. Are there any other thoughts from other commissioners on that particular piece of question 1 for 2020 budget? Okay, so we can jump back down to question 3. Are there concerns with assumptions staff has used to determine impact? Any concerns?
This is Commissioner Boley. I don't have any concerns. Thank you.
Commissioner Larson, the only concern I have, and I don't even know if it's really a concern, just a thought that although we projected this for 9 months, you know, I would encourage us to take a longer picture or view of that. And I know we're looking at the end of 2021, but to continue to stretch that out so that we're looking at a longer view of what the potentials are, especially with the impact of KU, and I know that's going to be a huge piece of it, and that we continue to have conversations with KU and work with them to, you know, determine what their pathway is as we continue to revise this model.
Vice Mayor Finkeldine.
Go ahead, please.
Vice Mayor Finkeldine. No, I don't have any problems with the base assumptions, and obviously I think we want to use the 9-month scenario now, and as we move forward, we'll see if it gets worse or if it gets better. But I appreciate the scenarios, but I think for now we need to use the 9-month one.
Anything else? This is Mayor Anand again. So let's go ahead and move on to our fiscal year 21 budget questions. I do want to throw out there, we've been meeting now for approximately 3 hours. Does anyone need a break? Y'all have stamina. Okay. So we will look at question 1. What service level reductions would you consider?
Commissioner Larson, I think that the first thing I would look at is, I guess, ask is whether we're looking at temporary changes or permanent changes, and how does that match up or mix with any other decisions we might want to make about this Venn diagram tonight.
Chairman Willen, Finance Director. As we've said a couple times, all of these are variables, and so what we're just trying to do is hone in as best we can to get a feel for, you know, what it is that you would be comfortable seeing in a recommended budget from the city manager. And so that's the question: is are you looking for temporary? If you were looking at service level reductions, would you anticipate that those just be 1 or 2 years, or would you anticipate or be willing to consider ending programs that we've done previously? That's sort of the question that we're asking you, is to give us guidance on that.
Commissioner Larson, I don't know if we can cut out any of those potential options at this. I can't anyway at this point. I think it's a matter of looking at what those look like, whether it's cuts to services and coupled with increase in user fees or increase in taxes or lowering taxes. There's so many variables here that it's hard for me to say, you know, which ones I would prefer over the others.
This is Commissioner Boley. I think in this environment, it's nearly impossible to consider property tax increases or recreation fee increases. I just don't see us being able to do fee or tax increases right now. So that necessarily says to us, we have to consider service level reductions. I am concerned about maintaining service levels in our core services. You know, we need to provide clean water. We need to make sure the sewers work. We have police and medical and fire obligations we need to meet. And frankly, I think, you know, I've viewed parks and recreation as one of our core services, but, and we still have parks. Even if we don't have recreation programs to the level we had before, we still have parks. So those are some of the things I see as very basic and hard to adjust service levels in those areas, except for perhaps parks and recreation. But beyond that, I think we have to be open to a lot of things.
This is Mayor Nodestor. I agree with your assessment in that we don't want to increase charges for our services, and I don't want to increase taxes. And so that does leave us with services, which are difficult decisions, but for me, less difficult than the other two. Would put an undue burden, a disparate burden on folks who need those services that we can keep around. I think that as we're looking at Parks and Rec services, visitors, tourism services, they're going to be not less feasible. And so if we can make some really difficult decisions in that area, not that they will be fun or that I want to make those decisions, but I think that they're the kind of things that we need to make decisions about. But we also have things like parking enforcement that we're not engaging in, which is losing revenue, but also decreasing costs. Our SROs, our school crossing, depending on what August looks like, that can be an impact. Obviously not something I'm interested in discontinuing if school is in session, but our tournaments, our arts and culture festivals, things that, as I was looking through this, just struck me as items that might not be an option, or the extent to which they can be an option would minimize their impact, would take away from other things that maybe we can do really well, or events that we can partner with the county or other organizations to have happen for a community that look different from the ones that are here. Temporarily, obviously.
Commissioner Larson here. Yeah, I agree with Mayor Ananda that it is not that situation. I look at this, even though as difficult as this situation is, and it's going to be going forward, this is truly an opportunity for us to look at what our true core services are that are needed to ensure the safety in the lives of our community. And that's where I would like to see us go, is to look at those very basic core services and then work our way up from there.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldye. So far, I agree with pretty much everything folks have said. I agree. Of course, we have to focus on core services. I will say, when I think of temporary versus, permanent suspension of programs, I think there's two reasons something would be suspended. Temporarily, it could be suspended because we just can't do it, right? Because of the health of our community, we can't do a particular activity. And I think when you temporarily suspend the program for those reasons, just obviously like stay-at-home orders, people understand that, people are receptive to that, and they know the reason for that. And so clearly, I think there's going to be temporary suspension of programs that will have cost savings to it, but also would be suspended whether or not there was cost savings or not because of the health of our community. Permanently, then I'd pause for a second and say there's another reason you could temporarily stop something. That's just because you don't have the money to do it. It's something you want to do, but you don't have the money to do it. I think in the short run, we'll have to see if those exist. I think in the long run, at least I'm open to that consideration. As I think about the strategic plan, and when we ask people during the strategic plan, what's most important to you, what you like the best about Lawrence, what you like the least about Lawrence, what you want to see changed about Lawrence, I keep wondering to myself and think, would people answer those questions the same today as they did back in February? Or would there be things that they would change? That it no longer is X that important to them. It was before, but now in this new world in which we live, is X still important to them? And there could be things as we look forward that are some level of service that we've provided, but going forward, either for health reasons or because of changing priorities, are not something we see as important. And so at least I'm open to staff considering those options and bringing those forward and not taking them off the table at this point, especially when you consider, I do not support property tax increases, for sure. And I also do, recreation fee increases, I think is a little more nuanced. If you're talking about a across-the-board recreation fee increase, I probably don't support that in a broad sense, because I don't think it's the time to charge more fees to people. That being said, take, for example, the gymnastics room at Rock Chalk. Under the current scenario, you have 20 kids in a class, and that funds 2 teachers, and you fill the class up, and I'm making up those numbers, and you charge a certain fee for that in order to use that room and have that class. Well, going forward, we might not be able to have 20 kids in that classroom. We might only be able to have 9 kids in the classroom safely. If you don't increase the recreation fee to pay for those services, then you just leave a gymnastics room empty and you have no option to use it. So I do think there's scenarios like that in which I would consider, hey, we double the fee because we have to cut the class size in half. Who is willing to pay for that? Is there enough people willing to pay for that to have a class? If so, we have the class. If not, we don't. So I do think there's situations in which there'll be recreation fees that could be increased to allow that service to continue.
Commissioner Larson here, Vice Mayor, I think that's a really good point you bring up, is that it's not going to be just a straightforward cut dried answer on that, but then we also have to realize is by advocating the idea of not having higher taxes or increase in service or recreation fees or whatever service fees, that means there's going to be a give on the other side or a take on the other side that it's going to require, my guess is, cuts in some services, more services as going forward. So there's a give and take on it, and if we're absolute that we don't want to do taxes or fee increases, and I'm not necessarily advocating for that, then we've also got to be ready to see that there's going to be potentially some pretty significant cuts in some services.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldine. I agree with that, and though I would say that, when I make these comments, I'm talking about only the 2021 budget, right, in which I do think we have the chance in the 20 budget and the 21 budget to use more in the way of our reserves that we wouldn't be able to if this continues in 22, 23, 24. And again, the longer it goes, then I think I'd be much, again, now you're talking more, I think, about, fees, taxes, versus level of services when you don't have the option as much to use, reserves. So I do think, I completely understand with your point. I guess for the purposes of giving guidance, though, to staff with a 21 budget, again, obviously they could present a scenario in which the service cuts are so severe that I change my mind. But I guess going into it, my guidance would be I'd lean towards not having a property tax increase.
This is Commissioner Boley. I appreciate, Vice Mayor, your position on the recreation fees, and would just like to compliment you for not throwing the cost recovery method from the Parks and Rec master plan out because of this. I think you've got a good point that we have to consider cost recovery as we go forward, and if costs have to go up to be able to recover that, then that's something that we'll have to deal with.
Commissioner Shipley, I think if the question here is temporarily or permanently suspend various programs, I think when we look at it temporarily, that gives us the flexibility. Even if we have to make some severe cuts just due to circumstances or because we can't afford it, that doesn't mean we can't aspire to go back to those services 2 or 3 years from now. It simply means we had to tighten it up. I would also say to Commissioner Boley and Vice Mayor Finkeldine's points there, the cost recovery is important. It was already a good conversation we were having, and I don't know to what extent. And if I recall, one of the goals was a use count, people count, how many people were coming into Rock Chalk and various places. So I'm sure that that's been affected by this, although I haven't heard particularly. But we do always have to be careful. I think in the case of the aquatic center is a good example. I feel that there's definitely a possibility that we charged too much and scared users off in that particular instance. So, of course, it's just about balance and finding the right cost recovery amount. And if anyone's asking, yeah, we can't. I don't feel that we can increase taxes at this point.
This is Mayor Nanda. I think that for me, I can't say absolutely not. I try not to ever say always or never because you'll always be wrong. And so I'm open to hearing your thoughts on this in your proposed budget. For me, I think the value that I'm bringing to this kind of three-pronged question is what has the least disparate impact. And that can be a mixture of several of those things. If we're charging more for highly specialized classes versus the summer camps that parents are going to need as they're going back to employment with severely reduced income throughout this year, to have their children somewhere that isn't home alone for that entire time, then I am more supportive of that. If it is increasing property taxes for a very specific reason because it is the least disparate impact on our residents, then that's a conversation I'm willing to have. It would be nearly impossible to argue that sales tax would be something to look at in that instance. I know that's not what we're talking about right now, but yeah, I think that the least disparate impact would be my primary concern as we're looking at all of these things. And I don't think it's A, B, or C. It's how do we prioritize A, B, and C so that we have all of those options open to us and to you as you're looking through what you want to propose. And that kind of speaks to questions 1 and 2. Are there any other thoughts? Bringing in question 2, what fee or tax increases would you consider? What fee or tax increases would you not consider from other commissioners?
Commissioner Larson here, and I'm definitely not interested in the tax increase aspect of it, but I would also, want to see, and I'm sure this will be given to us, is what the ramifications of that type of decision is.
This is Mayor Anand again. Anything else on either of those questions, Craig, that you would like to hear more about?
City Manager Craig Owens, yes, but not tonight. And I'll just say it's going to be tougher than this. And I think if you take all the revenue side off the table, and we're mainly concentrating on service reductions in one of the smallest departments we have, we're getting pinned in, but that's why you're asking me to put something together, and we'll do our very best on that. Just a warning that I'm taking the direction that I've heard, and there really isn't on that Venn diagram. You're kind of more towards that middle piece, but we'll bring you some options. I just was really trying not to spend too much time if there were some dead ends. So I'm almost hearing dead ends on property tax, and I'm almost hearing dead ends on sales tax because I'm not even sure if it's an option for us. So top 2 revenue sources, fee increases. I heard a little more wiggle room on that. And, it's our old classic conversation about what does core service mean, but we spent a lot of time talking about recreation here. So that's what I heard. So somebody stop me if I'm wrong, or if that's not what you intended. That would be helpful.
This is Mayor Anande. I know that we have been talking for a year now about our need to really look at our infrastructure and catch up on that. And part of my understanding around that conversation was that there would likely be, if we were really going to aggressively and responsibly deal with our infrastructure issue, that there would have to be property tax increases, which is why for me that isn't off the table, because I know to some extent I don't want to put us in a position at the very least of getting further behind, and that costs money. And so acknowledging that not having softball for the summer is not going to cover the cost of maintaining and repairing our roads. So that's not a straight up no for me. It's a painful I want to hear what you have for us, for me.
Commissioner Larson here, and I think that's kind of what I was hoping had got across, was that, with the idea of the interest, no interest in, or very little interest in raising taxes, is what that looks like. I mean, what and I'm sure, like I said, that you're going to bring that to us as to what it looks like, with the idea that we can make adjustments to our thought process based on the information that you bring forward. And that's what I'm looking forward to. Commissioner
Craig
Larson,
Owens.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to pivot a little bit. Craig Owens, City Manager. I was going to pivot a little bit and just say the temporary and longer term service reductions are important factors, in what we're doing. I think Vice Mayor Finkeldye brought something up about, you can use some techniques that are shorter term. You're really borrowing against your future, but if you think your future is going to be significantly better, then those are not bad ideas. But if you're really thinking this is a 3-year duration, how long does that L go out? And I'm not necessarily, we'll know more as time goes on, but I'm not necessarily in that camp. Stripping out capacity, when you're in the 2 or 3 year range, then those are bigger decisions. When you're in the shorter term, we're going to get through this 18 months and we're going to be expected to be delivering the same service levels that we were seeing, 3 or 4 months ago. Those are two different things. So, we'll look at those, but hopefully that makes some sense. Is if it's an 18-month equation, that's different than we're going to live with whatever we do for 3 years. Service reductions, those kinds of cuts, because if you strip capacity out too much, then ramping back up becomes a very expensive proposition as well.
Commissioner Larson, I do have a question for you, Craig. When we talk about cutting services or any level of how we're going to do this, I mean, aren't we talking quite a bit about staffing issues? Because that 70-80% of our budget is labor costs. So when we talk about the services or cutting them, doesn't that mean that we're talking about cutting staff?
City Manager Craig Owens, yes. I mean, that's the hardest part of this conversation, and the one that nobody here has taken lightly. And that's also to my comments I just made a second ago. That's part of that conversation. Is, are we talking 18 months? Or are we talking 3 years? And those are different strategies that we would employ. And yes, it is about the biggest part of our budget. Again, we've got to work with the biggest pieces of our budget, and if you concentrate it all down to one area, the catastrophic impacts could be something you'd say, well, that's not worth considering. That's not something that we would ever have done, but that was the only way to get the numbers that we need. So you just can't ignore the big pieces of our budget. It's a very dynamic process.
This is Commissioner Boley. My focus in this conversation has been 18 months. And I hope that's what, we've been trying to come to grips with here.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldine. I'm in that same boat that I'd be looking at the 18-month scenario, and not a scenario in which, as you said, we take more drastic measures. Now, 6 months from now, a year from now, we might, we're getting ready to do the 2022 budget. We might, say we messed up. It's much worse than we thought, and then we'll have to deal with that. But I think for the, given the information we have now and the planning purposes, I'd be looking at the 18-month as well.
Commissioner Larson here, and I guess that's what what I thought I was hearing earlier, is that since we were looking at decisions for the end of 2021, that we were looking at the longer time frame, which I fully agree with, is as we go forward with this model that we put together and continuing to update it, that we extend the time that we update it for, from I guess the example would be of 3 months, and we add that on to the end. So we are looking at a longer time period.
This is Mayor Ananda. So I'm guessing that gave Craig all of the information that he needs to come back to us, but I appreciate the extra conversation that we had around that. Let's go ahead and move forward to questions. Let's stick with question 3. Do you continue to support market pay for all employee groups?
Commissioner Larson here, I support it. I just don't know how feasible it is given our situation and the need to plan for the future. So, again, we have to, I want to see what staff brings forward, but of course I would support it, but we have to be realistic. That might not be a feasible option for us, depending on, what we want to see with our services.
This is Commissioner Boley. I concur. It's definitely a goal. Whether it's an achievable goal in the current situation remains to be seen.
This is Vice Mayor Finkeldine. I do think it's something, again, is the goal. I will say that my expectation is that market pay will be different going forward than market pay as we just, went through a study of. And so I think, again, we're going to continue to watch what that market is going forward. And I do think we want to have the, good employees, treat our employees fairly. And that means we have to pay market. But, again, what market is might be changing. I think we have to take that into consideration.
Commissioner Shipley, I see what you're saying, Vice Mayor. I think what I would always, and even if, again, we want to remain flexible here, to remember that if the market is changing, it's to a certain extent because we're taking advantage of someone. And you're right, to me, we have the best staff and employees available. In order to retain them, there has to be a certain amount of good faith that they won't be taken advantage of.
Vice Mayor Finkeldine, I agree with you. If what I said came out differently, I didn't mean it for that. I do think we need to support them, and certainly some of these frontline people are out there working every day doing very important work, and I do think we need to reward them for that. So I certainly agree with that. I just think we need to understand what that is. We did the market study. I know the unions often do market studies, we had some ground to make up. We're making up that ground. But is that exactly the same ground to be made up in 2022? Or have we made that ground up and gone beyond? I don't know. We'll just have to continue to watch that and study it.
This is Mayor Nanda. I think the things for me is, if we are looking at reduction in pay, to do that from a top-down method without too seriously creating too much pay compression between those levels of supervision. I think that is responsible, will set a good example, and will at least create some solidarity around the pain that causes. I also think that it is a question of whether or not we lose staff or we reduce pay, and in some instances, and maybe that is a question too that could be taken departmentally, certainly taking to staff and getting their thoughts on those two very difficult conversations, so that they're able to make the best decision for themselves as they can. I know that there are a lot of options that employers are considering, reduction in pay, particularly from a top-down method, having rolling furloughs, et cetera, reduction of pay so that they can maintain the staff. I also think that as we are looking at reduction of services, that will impact that conversation as well. So those are kind of the considerations that I hope you will take as you look at that question for me.
This is Commissioner Boley. I just want to take a moment and reflect upon the impact that this pandemic has had on our revenue stream, which is largely sales tax, and how that can impact our employees. This is not poor planning on the part of the government. This is a public health mandated shutdown of the economy that has come through to our revenue streams. And frankly, the federal government has passed legislation to support a wide variety of entities in our country, and justifiably so. But I think it's entirely worthwhile for the federal government to look at our situation and say, we need to support basic public services in a city where the revenue streams have been very negatively impacted. And so I just wanted to get that off my chest. And I hope that our staff is watching what's happening and is ready to move forward if such opportunities present themselves.
Ms. Mayor Nanda, one, thank you, Stuart, for saying that. Two, are there any other comments on question 3 regarding fiscal year 2021 budget? Okay, let's move on to question 4, which is, what is the most important thing you want the fiscal year 21 budget recommendation to contain? And that is in regard to that three-pronged question. Craig, do you want more discussion on that? Are you satisfied with our discussion on that?
Yeah, I think preliminarily, City Manager Craig Owens, I think preliminarily, we've heard you. It's tough, and I don't think continuing it will yield a lot more tonight, but I appreciate the thoughts that everybody has shared, and we'll use those.
This is Mayor Nanda. Thanks, Craig. I do want to definitely give commissioners an opportunity to share anything that they didn't share that maybe they have prepared for this question. Is there anything that speak now, or we'll be having this conversation again later? Okay. Is there anything else? Did I miss any questions here? Doesn't look like I did.
Mayor, this is City Manager Craig Owens. It just, I'll leave it on a little more hopeful trajectory, if nobody minds. The priority-based budgeting is where we need to, have these conversations. And I think getting the strategic plan, really having these conversations, because we understand it's not going to be easy. And the very best tool we can use in going into that difficult circumstance is the best, most clear and understood priorities that we can have. And that is going to make this tough task just a little easier, and it's going to be a more elegant delivery of a budget than what we would face if we don't have those clarified priorities.
This is Mayor Ananda. Thank you, Craig. So at this point, I think that we are ready to reconvene the regular meeting of the City Commission. Again, I will put out to commissioners the fact that we have been sitting here for 3.5 hours, which is unhealthy. But we do have a 20-minute executive session, and we can recess into that, at which point we will reconvene in our regular meeting, which we just resumed. Are there any preferences commissioners have moving forward?
Mayor, this is Commissioner Bowley. Could we take continue the recess for another 5 minutes and then come back and then go into the executive session?
This is Mayor Ananda. Please. Is anyone opposed to taking a 5-minute recess? We are recessed for 5 minutes.
Now it's cold again.
Okay, I might start by doing roll call. Commissioner Bully,
Here.
Commissioner Shipley,
Here.
Vice Mayor Finkeldine,
Here.
Commissioner Larson.
Here.
All right, we are all back and we are reconvening our regular meeting. Do we have a motion for our executive session?
This is Commissioner Boley. I move that we recess into executive session for approximately 20 minutes to discuss a personnel matter involving a city employee pursuant to the non-elected personnel matter exemption, KSA 754319B1. The justification of the executive session is to protect employee privacy. The City Commission meeting will resume in its virtual format in accordance with resolution number 7315 at the conclusion of the executive session.
Commissioner Larson, I second.
We have a motion. This is Mayor Nanda. We have a motion from Commissioner Bully, a second from Commissioner Larson. Commissioner Bully,
Aye.
Commissioner Larson,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Finkeldine,
Aye.
Commissioner Shipley,
Aye.
Mayor Nanda, aye. Passes unanimously. We will now leave this Zoom. Commissioners will now leave this Zoom to join the executive session. Are we ready?
Sure. Ready.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to take a roll call. Vice Mayor Finkeldine?
Here.
Commissioner Larson?
Here.
Commissioner Bully?
Here.
Commissioner Shipley?
Here.
Mayor Nanda here, so we are all present and accounted for. We are back from the executive session and we have nothing to report at this time. We are ready for a motion to adjourn.
Before I make my motion to adjourn, I'd just like to express my appreciation for the leadership Mayor Nanda has shown in our Zoom meetings. She's done a great job. Thank you. And with that, I move we adjourn.
Thank you.
Second, by Commissioner Larson.
We have a motion from Commissioner Bully, a second from Commissioner Larson. Commissioner Bully?
Aye.
Commissioner Larson?
Aye.
Commissioner Shipley?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Finkeldine?
Aye.
Mayor Nanda, aye. That passes unanimously. Thank you all, and we'll see you next Tuesday.
Thank you.